Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Resolution. Good afternoon, honorable members. At the break, we were debating the resolution whereas the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the United Nations that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights. I assume we are ready to resume. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I am again very grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak in this place once again on behalf of the good and wonderful people of the East Grand Bahama constituency. Mr. Deputy, I also was informed today, actually by the member for West End, or the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini, that Ms. Doris Smith has, from Grand Bahama, has passed away, I believe, today. And so we want to say to her family, she is a very, very well-respected, well-known person in Grand Bahama, and we are praying for her family, and we wish the family well as they go through this difficult time. Mr. Deputy, I am very pleased to be able to contribute to the debate that we are debating today, this resolution on the Human Rights Committee. And Mr. Deputy, we have been, I believe, going in a cordial way today. I believe that we have not been having a lot of negative back and forward. However, despite the way that we've been going so far, I may have to just adjust a bit going forward. So, Mr. Deputy, the Davis administration does not have a good record with parliamentary committees.
Come on.
They do not, unfortunately, have a good record with parliamentary committees. Unfortunately, I have not heard anything today that has changed this view, that has made me believe that us putting in place a human rights parliamentary committee will be any different. That the management of the committees and the way that they have managed the parliamentary committees prior does not instill confidence that will change things and that this Human Rights Committee will change things. The Fiscal Responsibility Council, Mr. Deputy, which was put in place to scrutinize the government's fiscal policies and also to scrutinize the government's fiscal strategy, really has been decimated. It has not reported. The constitution of that committee has been changed. So instead of the committee being appointed by the Speaker, The committee now is appointed by the Minister of Finance. They also have changed and have put in place a confidentiality clause and have made it an offense that if the Ministry of Finance makes something confidential and they speak to the public about it, then it is an offense to be able to speak for them to speak to the public about what the Ministry of Finance says is confidential. But they are designed, the committee was designed to be a committee that scrutinized, that held the government to account, that held the Ministry of Finance to account, to be able to look at the documents, require those documents to come, and then to be able to make the report on those documents. The Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee has been temporarily stopped by what I would call technical arguments. The Attorney General has instructed public officials not to comply with the committee's summons. The committee has sent out a summons, has sent out requests, and the Attorney General himself has instructed the public servants not to comply with the committee's summons. And point of order?
Just a point of correction.
Well,
Or clarification on it.
No,
Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Deputy, unless it is a point of order, fine.
Mr. Deputy, just would like to clarify, the Attorney General may have asked or requested public servants, right? Or instructed, if you want to use the word instruct, if he may have instructed public servants. However, that does not comprise the entire committee. That was the one individual. So there's no reason for the committee not to meet. I'm a member of that committee, and I haven't seen any summonses to attend a meeting since. So it may be unfair to say that the Attorney General, has stopped the meetings of the Public Accounts Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Mr. Deputy, let me go back through my notes. The Public Accounts Committee has been temporarily stopped by technical arguments. The Attorney General has instructed public officials not to comply with a committee summons. Now, Mr. Deputy, the opposition also attempted to form a select committee on immigration, which I would suggest would have discussed some of the same issues that this committee, this Human Rights Committee, would also be looking at. That select committee was outright rejected. So if, as a matter of course, that we have said that we are going to, we would like a select committee on immigration to look into all of the matters as it relates to immigration. And you have said, no, a select committee is not required. We have our policy and we are proceeding with our policy. So as I have said, Mr. Deputy, the government does not have a good record, in my view. They do not have a good record when it comes to parliamentary committees. However, taking into account the importance of this committee, we are compelled to give this committee every chance to succeed. So the reality is, you have not instilled any confidence in us when it comes to parliamentary committees, based on your track record when it comes to the Public Accounts Committee, based on your track record when it comes to the Fiscal Responsibility Council, and also when it comes to our request for a select committee on immigration. However, because of the importance of this committee, we will support your efforts in putting this committee in place. Now, let me also say, though, that this committee may fall by the wayside. It may be just a committee where you formed a committee today and you have a couple of meetings and you put in place a report and that's it. Yeah. And honestly, I have not heard anything that is going to instill confidence that, yes, this is going to be a real committee and that you are really going to make a difference when it comes to proceeding. But I believe, Mr. Deputy, that if this committee is constituted correctly and with the right leadership and the right mandate, the committee can do some good in this country. Now, Mr. Deputy, when it comes to putting in place this committee, when it comes to the Parliament really is the ultimate voice of the people in this country. So putting in place a committee for human rights is really what we are elected to do. We are elected to oversee the government's affairs. We are elected to oversee what the government does. And so putting in place a parliamentary committee when it comes to human rights, I think, is a natural fit, and it is something that parliaments all over the world have been doing. So us putting this in place, I think it is the proper and the right thing for us to be able to do. Parliaments, which are themselves the embodiment of the human right to participate in the conduct of the public affairs, is one of the countries, as one of the countries in Article 25 and 26 of the UD human rights, the United Nations development when it comes to human rights. Now, also, Parliament is supposed to be the body that the government reports to. They are supposed to be, the Parliament also is the body that's supposed to hold the government to account. In contrast to the government, judiciary, and civil society groups, parliaments are the place where government policies are and should be debated and scrutinized. So when it comes to putting in place government policy, judging it is what the Parliament is supposed to do. The Parliament is supposed to debate it, and the Parliament also is supposed to judge it. In Parliament, competing policy objectives are balanced to ensure respect for human rights and thus for the common good. We should be the watchdog on the executive, and therefore this is and should be the best place to be watchdogs when it comes to human rights issues in our country. Now, whether one thinks of security, health, public transport, education, social security, agriculture, or immigration policy, parliamentary decision-making in each domain will have a direct and indirect effect on the extent to which people enjoy their human rights. So the fact that this is the place that we debate, we argue, we speak about security, health, public transport, education, social security, agriculture, the immigration policy. This is where those decisions take place. And so the fact that those decisions take place, they directly affect our human rights. So this is the place to be. Parliamentary committees are supposed to be the way and are supposed to be the work that we do. We shouldn't just be here giving speeches, having a debate, but the real work should be the parliamentary committees. That is really where what we should be doing and how we should be impacting the country. But we need proper facilities. We need more space. We need a website. We need more staff. Even our, Mr. Deputy, even our declaration that we fill in, where, and all parliamentarians know this, where you must collect the form, write on the form, or type on the form, and then send that form in. When this day and age, it should be online, securely, where we should be able to type in, and those of us who've been here for a number of years, who've had to fill this form in for a number of years, I have a file that I have to keep my previous forms in, so that I can make sure that the forms are consistent. But this should be where you put it online. So even these type things are things that we need to be advancing when it comes to our very own parliament. So, Mr. Deputy, what is this committee mandated to do? We heard from the member for Freetown. We also heard from the member for Centerville that gave the point of reference of what this committee is supposed to do. But my question, though, is the committee able to move on items on their own? Or do they have to wait for the government to refer matters to them? So if the committee decided, or does the committee have the jurisdiction to decide on its own that it would like to look into different matters? If they decide that they would like to go down to the prison and look at the prison, or if they decided that they would like to go and look at the detention center, if they decided they wanted to go and look at the Simpson Penn Center, are they able to go and look at these matters on their own and independent from the government and make a report from the government or make a report to the government? A parliamentary committee that can only discuss human rights bills and issues referred to it by the House, for example, has a less margin to maneuver than committees that are able to independently determine their own agenda. So we would like to understand whether the committee is just a committee that is dictated by the government. You look at this, we send this to you, give us a report, or is this a committee, is this truly going to be an independent committee that can receive issues from the public and can go ahead and independently investigate those issues independently of the government, that they can go ahead and investigate those issues? If they can do it independently, then my submission is you are on the right track to having a committee that really is going to make a difference in the country. If it is just a committee that is going to be dictated by the government, that here's what you look at, here's what we want back from you, then we know the way that is going to go. Also, does this committee have the ability to supervise government actions? So human rights committees may also supervise government programs, state institutions dealing with human rights, and the government's general progress towards and compliance with human rights norms. So will this committee have the ability to look at government institutions as it relates to human rights and make assessments, make fair judgments, and give reports on those institutions? Can they go to the prison? Can they go to the Simpson pen? Can they go to the detention center and speak to people, look at these issues, and make a report back to Parliament and make a report back to the government on what should be done in order to comply with, if they are not complying, this is what should be done in order to comply with the law. This committee also should have a mandate to educate the public. So this committee also should be able to take in information, and as was said by the member, I believe the member for Freetown, who spoke about all of the UN reports when it comes to human rights, to say to the public, these are indeed what your human rights are. You have the right to life, you have the right to work, you have the right to all of these different things. And so will this committee have the right to be able to go out and educate the public? Will this committee also have a right to approve funding? Human Rights Committee may also be entrusted with financial tasks, such as approving funding for certain human rights related issues, for monitoring the efficiency of their implementation, and advising on funding for and financial review of human rights institutions. Are they going to be able to recommend to the Ministry of Finance that X amount of dollars be allocated for this, or X amount of dollars be allocated for that? We know that the Ministry of Finance really is the government body that deals with funding, but are they able to look at the entire situation and make recommendations to the Ministry of Finance? Well, let's, Mr. Deputy, look at what some other parliamentary committees for human rights are doing in other countries. And that would also give us an idea as to what our parliamentary committee could be doing, and what I would suggest some things that our parliamentary committee should be doing. So in December of 1999, the Justice Committee of the Bulgarian House of Representatives proposed an amendment for the insertion in the penal code, calling for the universal condemnation of and prosecution for various fundamental social rights. So this committee should be looking at making recommendations to the government on changes for our penal code. When it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to our rights for children, this committee should be looking at those matters and also be making recommendations to the government. In the House of Representatives in the Philippines, they approved a bill proposed by the chair of the Human Rights Committee, prohibiting the public display in a degrading manner of persons who are arrested or under arrest. In July of 2020, or July of 2002, at the initiative of the Human Rights Committee in Uruguay, they also made recommendations for the protection when it comes to domestic violence. The Human Rights Committee in the Parliament of Panama, they worked on a bill when it came to prison reform. So all of these we are hoping would be things that this parliamentary committee would be able to go into different departments, go into different areas of the country, and assess the state of government affairs, to assess the state of the entire country's affairs, and then to be able to make recommendations on those things. Also, when it comes to, there were certain parliaments that also looked at the child protection, to how the government's laws are related to child protection, what those laws should be. Look at what other countries have, and then make the proper recommendations when it comes to those laws. Mr. Deputy, in the Bahamas, we have a number of human rights issues that we are presently dealing with. And when I Googled human rights in the Bahamas, just to see what would come up, one of the first things that came up was the US report of the Bahamas' record when it comes to human rights. And the US does a report every year, and it's amazing that they report and are able to articulate in very great detail. I mean, this report is about 20-something pages. They are able to detail in very great, to state in very great detail all of the ways that they believe the Bahamas may or may not be complying with human rights. And the funny thing about it is, every one of them are already occurring in the United States. But already, yeah, they already, whatever is in the report for the Bahamas are all the same things are already occurring in the US. So, but it's a good, I would suggest it would be a good place to start in terms of at least looking at what is being said about the Bahamas and having this committee, for example, how the Public Accounts Committee is supposed to take certain reports and then take them apart and review them. And this may be a good report for the Human Rights Committee to take apart and to use as a guide every year to go ahead and review and look at these particular things. So one of the things inside the report that speaks about is when it comes to depriving someone of life or unlawfully or politically motivated killings. Well, they've spoken about, and again, this is what is being alleged in the report, but they've spoken about some police-related killings. Now, we know what those processes are, and we know that the processes, but the point that they made in the report was that the coroner's court determines whether the security forces or the police killings are justifiable and whether they should be prosecuted. However, they make the point that the Director of Public Prosecutions has yet to appoint a lawyer to marshal these cases. So again, this is something that the committee may need to look at. Why is it that those cases are not being marshaled? What needs to happen in order for those cases to be marshaled? That is one thing that this committee ought to or should be looking at. Another issue that was raised in this report was the torture of persons or going through degrading treatment and punishment and so on. And obviously they then point to the prison and the detention center conditions. The prison conditions, they say, were harsh due to overcrowding, inadequate sanitation, poor nutrition, and inadequate medical care. Having said this publicly, then this should be something that the Human Rights Committee goes in and takes a look at. Yes, the US is saying that this is the case. Well, let's go and investigate it. Let's go and take a look at it, and then let's bring the report back to Parliament. Let's bring the report back to the government to say whether we believe this is the case or not. Have our persons go, or have the parliamentarians go and go to the prison, talk to the prisoners, see the conditions for themselves, go to the detention center, speak to the people in the detention center, and see what is going on in the detention center. Another point that was also raised was the Simpson Penn Center for Boys. This again should be something that we in the House, through the Human Rights Committee, should also be going into and looking at. They should be going and looking at what is being said about the Simpson Penn Center. They spoke about a pretrial and spoke about those persons who were charged or who may be charged with immigration offenses and those persons who are being held for immigration offenses. They also, Mr. Deputy, one point that I wanted to also raise that they spoke about was the status of people who were displaced, but they also spoke about stateless persons. You know, I spoke to a lady, and I'll close with this. I spoke to a lady this week who said she was born in the Bahamas to non-Bahamian parents. She's gone to school in the Bahamas all her life, and I'm sure that parliamentarians all over have come across persons in this situation. And for whatever reason, she's unable to get a passport and has applied for citizenship and has been waiting for years. And this is one of the points that were made in this report, that there are people who've been waiting for 20 years, 20 plus years, waiting to hear whether they are going to be given a Bahamian citizenship or not. Well, this should be something that the Bahamas Human Rights Parliamentary Commission or Committee looks at, that we go into and hear the stories of people. She is someone who does not have a passport. And if she does not have a passport, then she had to get a national insurance card right after Dorian. So she almost slipped in to get a national insurance card. And if she doesn't have a passport, she cannot get a driver's license. And if she can't get a driver's license, she can't even get a job to Burger King or Kentucky to work. So she is forced to go without work, has 4 children, and which puts her in a situation where she has to go to social services. But she's someone who wants to work. And unfortunately, because of the situation that she's in, and she is, through no fault of her own, she has had to suffer through this. So, Mr. Deputy, it is my hope, it is my sincere hope that this committee, which I do support, that this committee will look at these real issues and report when it comes to these real issues. And it is something really that I believe has a lot of potential and can make a real difference in our country if we are able to come together and if we are able to do some things. So East Grand Bahama, Mr. Deputy, supports the appointment of this committee.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy, it is with gratitude that I recognize the privilege afforded to me to represent the people of Fort Charlotte. And it is a very timely debate, Mr. Deputy. The resolution calls for this Honorable House to constitute a committee comprised of members of the House of Assembly and the Senate to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process and improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. Mr. Deputy, before I address any international convention, regional convention related to human rights, I know that it's appropriate to begin with the supreme law of the Bahamas. Because the supreme law of the Bahamas, Mr. Deputy Speaker, frames the context and it gives the rights. It is superior to the Parliament, it is superior to the Cabinet, and it is superior to the judiciary. It is, as it states, Mr. Deputy Speaker, without any equivocation, it says, this Constitution is the supreme law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and subject to the provisions of this Constitution, if any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. The supreme law of our Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And just so that we get the historical context of the founding of this Constitution right, I just want to begin by quoting the preamble, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is the background to human rights in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It says, whereas 481 years ago. So we can't start from today. We have to look as our founders and the framers of our Constitution says. From 481 years ago, and whereas the people of this family of islands recognize that the preservation of their freedom will be guaranteed by a national commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law. And then it goes and it demands, it calls our attention, Mr. Deputy. Now know ye therefore, we, the inheritors of the successors to this family of islands, recognizing the supremacy of God and believing in the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. We're talking about human rights. Do hereby proclaim in solemn praise the establishment of a free and democratic sovereign nation founded on spiritual values and in which no man, woman, or child shall ever be slave or bondsman to anyone or their labor exploited or their lives frustrated by deprivation, and do hereby provide by these articles for the indivisible unity and creation under God of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Now, why would the framers of our Constitution call to the world and say, ever be slave, bondsman to anyone, or their labor exploited? We have to look at the history, Mr. Deputy. And then when it goes on in chapter 3, it states from Article 15 to 28, it begins, whereas every person, it could be a tourist, it could be an undocumented person, or it could be a citizen. It says every person in the Bahamas is entitled to the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. That is to say, has the right, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinion, color, creed, or sex, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest, to each and all of the following. And then it names life, liberty, security of person, the protection of the law, the freedom of conscience, of expression, and of assembly and association, and the protection for the privacy of his home and other property, and from deprivation of property without compensation. The Honorable Member from Freetown, Mr. Deputy, took us through 26 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 30. Thank you. 30 articles from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if we were to correlate from Article 15 going to 28 of our Constitution, you will see, Mr. Deputy, almost in identical terms, the commitment to specific areas of human endeavor. And we say these rights, subject to whatever conditions stated therein, these are rights which every person in this Commonwealth is vested. It's not a favor. It is a fundamental right because you are a human being in the Bahamas. And therefore, Mr. Deputy, before we begin with international, regional, we begin with our Constitution. And the Constitution mandates in these three branches of the government, of which we are only one, the three branches of government, we have our lawmaking body that prescribes the law for the peace, order, and good government of the Bahamas. We have our cabinet, which presides and makes policy and has control of the executive functions of the state. And we have the judiciary, and the Honorable Member of Freetown, in describing this important aspect or branch of governance, stated that it's based on independence. In other words, judicial independence. But there is another function that the judiciary has, and that is the judiciary has what we call the right of review. In other words, what we do in here, even though we have the privilege, what we do in here is subject to judicial review. And we have seen in our history, Mr. Deputy, where laws passed by this Parliament, passed by the Senate, assented to by the Governor General, have the minister give the appointed day for the effective day for the act, and someone goes to court, and the court exercising the power of judicial review, because we don't construe this, even though we are parliamentarians. It is the court that makes the authoritative construction of what this Constitution says and what it intends in the provisions contained therein. And we have seen, Mr. Deputy, we have seen provisions of the Immigration Act declared unconstitutional. We have seen conduct of the executive declared unconstitutional, and damages have to be paid for breach of the constitutional right. So we see, Mr. Deputy, this is not an academic exercise, because we have to ensure that the laws we pass are constitutional, because if they're not, a court and someone can invoke a provision of the Constitution and ask the court to scrutinize what we would have done. And we have seen, even with parliamentary privilege, we have a decision where disclosures made in this honorable House, a justice of the Supreme Court, and to my knowledge, it has not been appealed, a justice of the Supreme Court held that there was a violation of privacy rights. So, Mr. Deputy, human rights by our Constitution is an obligation that all of us have. And therefore, Mr. Deputy, what I'd like to point out is that when we look at the historical context, you know, we have to claim all our history, not just a piece of it. We have to claim all of it, because the people who suffered genocide in these islands, they belong here too. They were the first people to humanize these islands that we call home, and they were subjected to genocide. We have some of their practices, some of their accomplishments are part of our civilization, but they were humans too. We also have the history of the Loyalists. We have the history of the Lutheran adventurers. They're part of us. They're part of our history. But we also have the history of the Native American people. And just like Eleuthera and Abaco provided refuge for other waves of immigrants to these islands, we know that the western part of Andros provided refuge for the Seminole Native people of the Americas, as they were fighting, clinging to their land and refusing to be moved from their land in Florida to put up in Oklahoma. Some of them would not bow. And one of which was Chief Billy Bowleg. And some of us today carry the name Bowleg, descendants of this Seminole. Is it? and we have Bowlegs right here among us in Red Bays, seeking refuge from this, from the war being fought against the native people. But you also have, Mr. Deputy, that we don't like to talk about. Not all came in boat freely, looking for freedom. Some were brought here in chains. And you have the basins right there at Clifton. When they came off the boat, months in the belly of the boat, Mr. Deputy, first bath was on the rocks of Clifton. You see, all of that, if we don't look at all of that, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't understand why our founders put, never be a slave, because that's part of the history. And that history, Mr. Deputy, has been a long history where all of our people have been engaged in fighting for human rights. Fighting for human rights. In other words, poor whites who didn't have property, who didn't own company, they couldn't vote. African people couldn't vote. Women, up until, 1962, couldn't vote. So what we are talking about when we look here, I must say, I had some legal education, and I was exposed to the Magna Carta and some of these, but when we look and we talk about human rights in any country, it is rooted in a specific historical context. And that is why the framers, they were speaking to us, never be a slave again. And like other people say, never forget. But we must be vigilant. And as has been stated, we have still some way to go, because we know that notwithstanding our extraordinary progress, we know that there are disabilities, and one major stunning disability, Mr. Deputy, that we must make a commitment to change is the discrimination against persons who are disabled, persons who cannot walk up those stairs and come into this honorable parliament and hear the member from Central and South Abaco. What happened when someone who travels all the way from Abaco gets down to the gallery, to the entrance, but you need somebody to carry you up the stairs? We have much more to go. Those of us who have daughters, nieces, sisters who marry outside, children in the marriage now. But your son can marry whoever he or he wants to marry. And the child is a citizen at birth for the son, but not for the daughter, not for the niece, not for the sister. So we have more work to do. And the extraordinary journey over these hundreds of years has affirmed, and this is why 1973 is so important. It is important for all of us, not just some of us, because it represents Pompey, Kate, all of those people who say, look here, I've had enough. When those people march on Burma Road up to Bay Street and I say, I is man, they say, I'm a human being. I'm entitled just like the Americans who are working with me to get the same pay. So this question of human rights is enshrined in our supreme law. Now, what is interesting, Mr. Deputy, is that the politicians who led us into majority rule understood that the Bahamas, after framing these fundamental rights in the Constitution, that the Bahamas is not an island unto itself, it is part of a global community. And what I must say, and I'm just going to give some examples, and this is we have to give credit to the PLP and we have to give credit to the FNM. Because under both administrations, they have taken this country and they have joined with the international community. For example, Mr. Deputy, the Bahamas joined the United Nations and accepted and became a signatory to the UN Charter in September 18, 1973. Now look at it. Independence is July. It's just a matter of months. We recognize that what we put in our Constitution has to be affirmed within the global international community. Ain't nobody forced the Bahamas to join the United Nations. And I hear people talking about sovereignty versus human rights. What sovereignty? It was an exercise of sovereignty to join the United Nations months after, not years, months after. We see again also, we have 2 years later, 1975, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. That's an international convention under the United Nations. We joined it willingly. You know why? To make sure that we were better protected and that we were in the body of nations, believing and affirming the same values and ensuring reciprocity so that when Bahamians travel, when Bahamians find ourselves in other jurisdictions, we have the same standard to protect the life, the welfare, the dignity of our people outside of the Bahamas. We also see joining the Convention on the Political Rights of Women, and this is in 1977. In 1976, before that, the Convention on the Nationality of Married Women. And in 1976 also, the convention, the Slavery Convention. Similarly, in fact, on the same day, we also signed the Supplementary Convention on the Abolition of Slavery. And what we see, Mr. Deputy, is that this commitment to buttress the fundamental rights in the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas being entrenched by joining the Bahamas with this evolving human rights, global human rights body. We also see, Mr. Deputy, in 2009, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Also in 2009, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Again, Mr. Deputy, this is under a different administration than the present, but we see the same commitment. So when we say sovereignty versus human rights, what are we talking about? Nobody forcing us. Now, let me just make one qualification. It is not the United Nations. There are what I call ad hoc bodies, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Ad hoc bodies. Ad hoc bodies. Ad hoc bodies like the FATF. Ad hoc bodies that deal with money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism. Ad hoc bodies dominated, controlled by countries, Mr. Deputy, who are in competition with us in financial services. And those bodies, the Financial Stability Forum, under the European Union, and Mr. Deputy, I can tell you from my personal experience, when I serve as Attorney General, first of all, we know, and I must say, I'm a little sympathetic for the government in 2000 because there was this, the Bahamas was put on the list of non-cooperative countries by the FATF, the Financial Stability Board, and even the United States Treasury. And of course, panic and a raft of legislation passed. I remember when we came in 2002, we had to be rolling back, because to open up an account, I mean, and your cousin is right there working in the bank, know you all your life. You couldn't open up an account unless you took you had to carry all kinds of documents and so on, and to prove that you were who she or knew you to be. In other words, it had no correlation between risk of money laundering or combating or terrorist financing. And what we had to do was to systematically roll back. Now, that is not human rights. I would call it protectionism. I remember when I went to Paris to represent the Bahamas, and the Bahamas came up on the, as I've stated before, on the agenda. I was the chairman of CFATF. They asked me to leave. So that's different from what we are talking about in terms of regional, as we've done with the Organization of American States and with the United Nations. And that is why, Mr. Deputy, I make no apology for calling for a global forum where the issues of money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and taxation are put under UN convention, because no ad hoc body should be able to punish the Bahamas when the Bahamas, and they are answering to the European Union, and we are not members of the European Union. But what we see here, Mr. Deputy, is that we have the opportunity today, and it appears to be in a bipartisan way, to affirm what our founders committed us to: the protection of fundamental rights, the securing of those fundamental rights through international cooperation. And therefore, Mr. Deputy, Forchalit supports the resolution and urge all members to do likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Adrian.
As many? Chair recognizes the honorable member for Long Island.
Madam Speaker,
I rise on behalf of the great people of Long Island to represent and speak to their interests in this place on yet another occasion. Madam Speaker, I want to firstly note that we got some good news today in Long Island, that the barge is in Clarence Town and that the rock for the road builders is nearby. And we are looking forward to getting that rock on the island and getting that road built. And so we're grateful to hear that, Fort Charlotte. That is good news for the people of Long Island. We look forward to seeing those works progress. Madam Speaker, I also have been apprised of, or I've been informed of the highway naming in a couple of weeks. The Main Queens Highway, a section of that, from Pindus to Scrub Hill. I understand that it's to be named after a noted Long Island gentleman, former soldier, businessman, the late J.B. Carroll, the section between Pindus and Scrub Hill. And so I had a conversation with the chief counselor today, and I'll wait on my invite from the Ministry of Works. But we were pleased to hear that. But what I would say is that in naming this highway, and this highway is pothole laden, maybe some patchwork or something can be done in advance of that for Charlotte. And Fort Charlotte is nodding in agreement, and I appreciate that.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Fort Charlotte.
There is there is road work currently underway in Long Island. But in addition, we should be announcing shortly a major, much larger road redevelopment project for Long Island to facilitate the economic development that's taking place and hopefully attract more.
Fort Charlotte, I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
honorable member.
I'm very grateful to hear that. Long Island thanks you, and we're looking forward to the signing of that contract and the rollout of the new roadways in Long Island. We hope that it's also taken into account a few of the side roads as well. And so, thank you for that. You know, we have lots of local heroes from our island, from end to end. And so, in time, we'll have lots of names to submit for the naming of roads, side roads, docks, schools. You know, the schools in Long Island, some of them haven't been officially named, and other government edifices.
Also, in this 50th anniversary year, we encourage all members of Parliament in every part of the country to nominate persons for consideration for the naming of roads, docks, schools, and other public infrastructure, so that we memorialize this year by recognizing those persons who have made significant contribution to us over the years.
I'm gonna touch bases with my chief counselor and the local leaders on the island, and we'll certainly be submitting our list within 14 days. Madam Speaker, I also want to note that I saw on social media a couple of second homeowners who presented 2 Jaws of Life tools for the people of Long Island. Now, what's good for the people of Long Island is good for me, right? I welcome that on the part of my people, despite the crass and disrespectful way those involved went about it. Because there seems to be a disrespect for the will of the people of Long Island. You know, I didn't know about it. I saw it on social media. The chief counselor and I had a long chat yesterday. He didn't know about it. So the 2 lead folks who were elected by the people of Long Island didn't know that something was being donated to Long Island. You know, my colleagues in here, all members here, people treat us how we treat each other. They're watching us and how we interact with each other. So here we had 2 appointees accepting items on behalf of the people of Long Island when the elected representatives for the people of Long Island, was not aware and nowhere to be found. And then we hear about a private charter going to pick up the administrator, okay? And the chief counselor informed me that, none of us knew. Charter's going up to Long Island to pick up the administrator, but the administrator hasn't informed us. None of us is informed about this. So I don't know which country it is where someone can be rejected at the polls by the people and then pretend to be representing the people. Where has that ever happened? I don't recall that happening in the last administration. And I refuse. I remember, I found that extremely disrespectful, okay? I remember refusing to take some of my colleagues, Felicia Knowles, Zendel, down into South, and Zendel from South Andres, Felicia in Cat Island, and Felicia, I hope that you've forgiven me. I believe that you have. Because, I thought it would have been disrespectful and it didn't look right. So I didn't take both her and Zendel with me, even though they wanted to go when I went to those respective islands. So I want to reiterate that we do not have an appointed senator for Long Island. Okay? We have an elected member of parliament. Okay? Government change. And we all know that the pendulum swings, so no one in here wants that to be done to them and their constituency. No one. Okay? And I encourage those of us on either side of this divide that should demonstrate the respect for each other rather than trafficking and gross disrespect for members of parliament, chief councilors, and elected persons on these islands. Totally disrespectful. Totally. And no one in here can say that I have ever gone into their constituency when we won office without informing them or taking them into the constituency, whether it was for an opening, something getting turned on, or just being responsive to them. And so I just want some reciprocity, to use the word for the member for Fort Charlotte used. Some reciprocity. There are unspoken rules among us in this place, and that's one of them. Moving on, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Fred Smith, King's Counsel. When I came out of law school, or the bar school, he recruited me to become the calendars. I went and worked for Sir Michael Barnett for a few months before going to him, because I wanted to have that experience working with the judiciary. My former boss at Calendars & Co. When I think about human rights, and I see the conversation about human rights, I think about this gladiator, a true believer in the preservation of constitutional and human rights, a crusader for human rights in this country. I support this resolution. Madam Speaker, for years we've seen that human rights, the rights of women and children, environmental rights, the rights of animals have not gotten the most overt attention here in the Bahamas. We seem to generally adopt an outlook that is somewhat nonchalant. In this country, we've heard many instances where people have been violated without recourse. We have seen abuse become the standard operating procedure in certain quarters. And quite frankly, it has unfortunately, in some instances, led to a degree of vigilantism that we are seeing being manifested in the Bahamas. So we must begin to see the connection between the choice to treat people that way and the way that they behave. Madam Speaker, we've heard in recent months and years about police shootings, arbitrary arrests, the deprivation of property, patients' rights in hospitals. We've heard the complaints from patients. We've heard about attorneys, and any one of us who's practiced any kind of criminal law, maybe a single case, or maybe even talk to colleagues. We've heard about attorneys being run around from one station to another looking for their clients. We've heard about stories about police officers driving suspects from one place or one station to another to keep them and their counsel apart. We've heard all these stories. You know, in the United States, they teach the Constitution from kindergarten. And that is something that we must do in this country. I believe that the Constitution should become a subject unto itself. Because there are many persons in this country who've never read the Constitution. There are many persons in this country who don't understand the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution and guaranteed to all Bahamians. One notes that Article 18 of our Constitution protects Bahamians and those within our shores from arbitrary arrest or detention, and Article 16 speaks to the protection from inhumane treatment. We cannot sit silently when fundamental rights of any citizen, these human rights of any citizen or visitor to this country, is violated or allegedly violated in any way by anyone. Privacy rights. It's another human right, also enshrined in our Constitution. The member for Fort Charlotte mentioned the email disclosures in this House. And I was on that legal team. I was a participant in that chain of emails, legally privileged emails. You know, no law enforcement officer who dons the taxpayer's uniform and carries a firearm has a license to mistreat, disrespect, and/or exploit the public. We've heard of the rights of Bahamians and foreigners being trampled. We hear daily stories. We hear about over-aggressive law enforcement officers. Over the years, I've worked on a number of cases where we've seen more than enough instances of the state showing an eerie willingness to detain someone and throw away the keys without any regard to matters being heard in the court within a reasonable time or at all. Madam Speaker, sadly at times it appeared that the only time the state seemed to care was when it was brought to the attention of the international media, and we as a country became subject to great embarrassment because of the foolish decisions and thoughtlessness of a few. You know, we've seen that with the treatment and the imprisonment of the Japanese gentleman, Atin Takiota. Takiota was lost in the system and became forgotten. He was a forgotten ward of the Bahamas Department of Corrections. For my former clients, Carlos Sierra Marin and Carlos Pupo Mendoza, and I'm sure you remember them, who were detained without charge and/or trial at the Bahamas Department of Corrections at Fox Hill. In 2013, Lazaro and his friend Carlos were arrested in Abaco. They're originally from Cuba, but they claimed that they were fishermen and had licenses to fish. Our understanding was that following their appearance before the magistrate in Abaco, the men were ordered to pay a fine of $300 in order to return to the United States. The men purportedly paid their own airfare to New Providence and were detained at a detention center. We were advised that their families had paid for their tickets for them to be returned to the United States, but they were not allowed to leave the Bahamas Department of Immigration or that is the detention center. So at this juncture, we understood that both of these men, because of the lengthy detention, had lost their, at that time at least, they'd lost their residency status in the US. Both of the men told me when I went to see them, they were abused and beaten at the Carmichael Road Detention Center. In fact, during the proceedings to determine whether Cuban detainees were abused while held at the center, Carlos, at the time, testified before a panel presiding over the trial of 5 Defense Force officers, Marines, charged in 2013, following an investigation into claims of abuse at the detention center at Carmichael Road. Carlos testified against those Defense Force officers. Madam Speaker, I have a lot of friends and family members who are police officers. I once considered becoming a policeman myself, after being asked to join by the then Commissioner of Police, Paul Farquharson, who spoke at our graduation ceremony in Long Island in 2001. Madam Speaker, there are many decent, considerate, reasonable officers who truly aspire and go out every day to detect protect, and serve. These officers are passionate about their chosen career. Many policemen and women are upstanding Bahamians who love their countrymen, love their country, and strive to abide within the realm of the law. However, we've all heard of the violations of human rights by certain officers who've been accused of near systemic patterns of police brutality, verbal abuse, and outright misconduct, clearly in violation of citizens' rights. We've all heard of it. I know that there are some, perhaps the majority, like I said, of officers who are sincere, hardworking, whose professionalism is second to none. But our society has been inundated with allegations of police brutality, where certain officers are accused of having cultivated an air of terror and have displayed vile and sadistic behavior, and perhaps laid bare the flaws in police recruitment and training, as well as revealed a lack of professionalism. Some Bahamian officers have gained a reputation for bludgeoning citizens and using excessive force, carrying out false arrests, psychological intimidation, and expletive-filled assaults. Certain groups of rogue officers have demonstrated or seem intent on demonstrating their power by conducting themselves like rude brutes and often being unpleasant in their quest for a person's subjugation and/or control. That cannot be accepted in a modern-day Bahamas that preserves human rights, constitutional rights, the rule of law. Most lawyers have heard accounts, various accounts, of the intensive, cruel interrogation tactics allegedly used to obtain confessions, and sometimes the disregard for the concept of due process. A few years ago, 25-year-old Jamie Smith and 21-year-old Aaron Roll both died while in police custody. According to the autopsy reports, Smith died from asphyxiation and Roll from blunt force trauma. We all remember the story of Brenton Smith. I remember meeting his mother. Brenton was shot, and his mother was distraught. In August 2007, 3 cases were heard in the Supreme Court, 2 murders and an armed robbery. And they were tossed out after the judges instructed jurors not to return a guilty verdict. And this has happened throughout the years. I'm just citing this particular year. And the judge instructed the jurors not to bring back a guilty verdict because it was determined that the confession statements of the accused were obtained unlawfully and under duress. I vividly remember the case of the beating of Desmond Key by police officers, which led to him falling into a coma and ultimately dying, or the killing of Andros native Kenneth Russell in September 2007 by a policeman, which raised many concerns about the police use of force and so on. And then in 2009, the highly suspicious death of 15-year-old Michael Knowles, who was found dead in a cell, hanging from a cord while in police custody, that caused much political and social upheaval. According to police, Michael Knowles committed suicide and was being held under suspicion of housebreaking and stealing. You know, the member for Angleston nobly attempted to accelerate the investigative process into the death of the teenager, Michael, particularly as that case engendered much public outcry. In her zeal to shine the light on the issue, the member for Angleston, whose constituency is where Knowles lived, or next door to Knowles, next door to where he lived, because I think Knowles lived at St. Cecilia. The member for Angleston did not comply with the directive of the then speaker, and as a result was named and suspended for 2 sittings. I did not support that decision, and I commend her today for that decision to stand up, even if it meant being named and tossed out. I met Michael Knowles' distraught mother, who at that time told me that, and I'll quote her, said, "I only want justice." and was seeking scientific confirmation of the reasons for her son's demise and an inquest into her son's death. I don't know what happened with that, what was the final outcome. Internationally, Madam Speaker, we have heard several highly publicized incidences of police cruelty. We know that in the 1960s, the civil rights movement was plagued by incidences, inhumanity, police brutality, human rights of persons just because of their skin tone, skin color, violated, where campaigners for equality were bludgeoned with nightsticks and blackjacks, attacked by police dogs, washed down and pummeled by high-powered water hoses, and falsely arrested and racially profiled. Press exposure of those incidents, of course, led to public outcry, and right-thinking persons and sympathizers joined the causes. And that's how many blacks in America have some of the rights they have today. And then you had in 1977 the death of South African freedom fighter Steve Biko, whose death is largely believed to have been caused at the hands of police officers, particularly since Mr. Biko played a role in numerous anti-apartheid demonstrations. All of us in here have heard of Rodney King. We've heard of Trayvon Martin, of George Floyd, Tyrell Nichols, and so many others. I watched that video recently with Tyrell Nichols, and man, that tugs at your heart to see that young man being pummeled and beaten as he stood up and was punched in his face, handcuffed. It made one want to weep. He died a few days later in hospital. But these videos continue to ricochet in my head. They're shocking. Shows a complete lack of respect for human rights. And they take an emotional toll, no doubt, on the people who are affected as well as the families. Absolutely egregious conduct. And that was difficult to watch. Madam Speaker, I've been told of incidents at the Central Detective Unit's headquarters. These officers have shared this with me. I'm not making this up. Where brutal attacks have been carried out on suspects, for example, the alleged use of tasers and other forms of electric shocks, such as connecting one end of a vehicle jumper cable to a charged battery and affixing another end to a subject's genitals. Many of us have had clients who told us these stories. Other examples are placing and tightening plastic bags, the bags that the fishermen use for the fish, over the heads of handcuffed suspects. Tying an anchor rope around a suspect's neck while that same bag is over their head, where the suspect passes out, and then they bring an oxygen tank to revive the suspect. To wrapping a cutlass or a machete in a sack to prevent external marks and cuts, and hitting persons on their shoulder blades and on their feet. To allegedly using a vice grip or pliers to squeeze a man's testicles. To allegations of waterboarding. To supposedly or allegedly hitting women on their breasts. To battering persons with phone books or their fists or feet, and allegedly placing guns on one's forehead or a revolver in the mouth of suspects and playing a game of Russian roulette, etc. I was informed by certain officers, certain interrogators, rogue interrogators, would ask a person in custody a question, then suddenly get up whilst that person is tied down and kick them in their chest if they did not accept the answer that was proffered. Frankly, Madam Speaker, the extrajudicial killings that we are seeing of unarmed suspects and or innocent people in some instances, and the allegations of inhumane conditions in blood-stained, urine-scented police holding cells should be of grave concern to all of us. An independent commission or a civilian review board must be established to properly investigate law enforcement and restore public confidence when there's any breaches, particularly since I believe that internal commissions lack accountability. I don't expect the police to investigate the police. and it is nearly impossible, I believe, for the police to adequately police themselves. Have we established such an independent commission? How do we ensure the protection of persons against search and seizures that are not judicially authorized or supported by probable cause or a substantiated suspicion of criminal activity? How do we protect against arbitrary detainment and protect an individual's legal rights? How many officers are today wearing body cams? I think that should be mandatory. Every officer should wear a body cam, and no one should be able to turn it off. How many police cars are currently outfitted with dash cams? As cases of alleged brutality are investigated, investigators must no doubt account for the wall of silence that has pervaded police culture, particularly the failure of any officer to report another officer's misconduct in an attempt to honor the officer's unwritten code of silence. You know, Madam Speaker, in 2013, the then acting coroner, Janine Weish Gomez, who's now a Supreme Court Justice, called for cameras to be installed at every police station at the entrance to the cell block area, and that all interviews with suspects be recorded in an effort to ensure that officers follow proper procedures and prevent police brutality. Madam Justice Weish Gomez, as she now is, also recommended that the surveillance and control of these cameras and recordings be monitored by a separate department at police headquarters or elsewhere, and that police officers receive training in the proper restraining of suspects at least every 2 to 3 years. So are there any closed circuit television recordings within the various police stations that provide footage of those who entered or exited a holding area where the most recent suspects, where any suspect is situated? If CID is capable of recording both interviews on video and audio, why is it then that all videos or all interviews aren't mandated to be recorded? Would any failure to record interviews lend to a continuation of an archaic interrogative format that often results in suspects alleging police abuse? Why are suspects being arrested and not afforded the opportunity to contact a lawyer before being interrogated? What about due process? Some years ago, we reported that the then Ministry of Legal Affairs, as it then was moving to make videotaping of police interviews mandatory to bring an end to brutality claims. Another proactive measure, Madam Speaker, would be the introduction of notarized witness statements, purportedly have a justice of the peace visit the stations, inspect, see these persons, and give a statement as to their condition. I think that was also something that was considered a few years ago. While I support fully the enforcement of law, it can never be acceptable when young men, when the underprivileged, when Bahamians at large can attest to an air of fright and mistreatment when dealing with law enforcement. You know, police academies in the United States train officers, I think, for a full year. And I know in the Bahamas it was 6 months. I heard it was cut back to 4. I don't know if it's gone back to 6. But I think training and retraining at all levels of law enforcement, not just the police, is pivotal towards law enforcement observing the human rights of Bahamians. Madam Speaker, the issuance of a use of force continuum is said to keep the use of force by law enforcement in check by setting the levels of force that appropriately corresponds with any suspect's behavior. This is an element of policing that can be explored by the police force and the government. And the question is there a use of force continuum in place today? And so, Madam Speaker, I support this resolution. As a human rights lawyer, as one who's seen this on the front lines, I can tell you that any committee that seeks to underscore, to advance the respect for human rights in this country is supported by myself and any resolution to establish the same. Madam Speaker, I rest.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marathon.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my colleagues and also my colleagues opposite. Of course, Madam Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great constituents of Marathon. And before addressing the resolution on the Human Rights Committee, I would like to extend my condolences to Permanent Secretary Joel Lewis on behalf of the passing of his father, Minister, the great member for West End, Bimini. We extend our condolences to him and his family at this time. And I would also like to say happy Administrative Day to all the administrators, both in social services and urban development. And particularly those, I would say, who I work day to day with, Perez Rule. He's a very good administrator, very good. Ms. Yvonne Sands at Urban Renewal. And also, I would also like to thank, even during his time of bereavement, Mr. Joel Lewis for all the work that he do tirelessly in social services and by extension, his arms in urban renewal. It's no easy task, but we want to publicly thank him for his work. I would also like to say that Marathon had its first annual college fair at the William Thompson Auditorium on Friday, the 21st of April. And certainly, I would like to thank the member for Angliston who allow us to, engage with the kids at the various schools during school time, of course. And I would also like to thank Bridget Francis Ingram, the college planning and consultancy firm, and her entire team. A whole team of professionals who helped us in strategizing and executing this fair. We landed some 400 plus students who was there at the fair. And of course, no one person can do this. I had a whole team of professionals. I would like to thank Bishop William Thompson for allowing us, of course, to use the auditorium. It was not free now, it was discounted, so I don't want everybody to go rush the great bishop, and of course, but he did extend his hand to us. I appreciate that. Mr. Stephen Dean, Dr. Sheena Moss, Nolan Carey, Mrs. Liddy Mae Longley, Keno Wong from Omega Party Rentals. We thank him for his contributions. Mrs. Diane Seymour, Kishelle Higgs, Romeo Josie, Myrtle Andrews, Vestra Wallace, Narissa Johnson, Deborah Hanna, Hesbon Burrows, Trevor Seafoot, Jackie Lewis, Angel Johnson from the PYL, and Mr. Terrell Tinker, who are good, young, vibrant moderators. Matthew Roll, Reagan Brown, Kenu Brennan, Tyrone Hanna, Owen Williams, Udane Brown, who cooked all that food for those kids out there. We even treat them to lunch. So they had lunch on the spot for 400 plus students. Calvin Brown, Mr. Carroll, Wilton Russell, and Garth Munker. So you see, it was it was not political. We expressed that. It was community, because the hands were not only extended to Marathon, but to all of the schools that came, who were invited. They came out and participate. And certainly I would like to thank the parents living in the Marathon constituency who allowed their children to participate in the fair. And they was very receptive as the team went around door to door weeks ago, asking for their support and allowing their kids to be a part. And certainly, of course, I would like to thank the mini schools. There was so much to mention. Aaron Bailey, C.V. Bethel, Anatole Rogers, L.W. Young, C.H. Reeves. This is only to name just a few. We also had private schools on the ground. I want to thank the principals and all the guidance counselors who took part in this. And a special thank you to my colleague, the Honorable Leroy Major, the Executive Chairman to BAIC. He was excited when he heard about it, when Anatole Rogers also reached out to him. He bought 3 buses full of children, and he rode on the bus. So I thank God for him. Also to Gerard Davil, who accompanied him. And much thanks to our local universities. Of course, our local universities comes first, and colleges. The University of the Bahamas, we thank the president, Mr. Rowland, who was very excited when we reached out to him to give an address. At that time, he had another engagement, so he sent a representative. We're thankful for that. Also, the Bahamas Baptist College, Dr. Reed, She was there, present and correct. Bamsi was in the house. Most of the kids were very excited for Bamsi. The University of the West Indies, Mrs. Bridget Cooper, BTVI, and our cadre of international universities were there. And of course, Houston-Tilliston University, the Dean of Business, Dr. Stephen Edmond. He, and of course, those who do accountancy would know that this is one of the top schools, one of, in accountancy, who was graciously given a scholarship already to a 17-year-old, Mr. Brian Carey. He received the prestigious Accounting Scholarship Award. And this was not, like I said, Madam Speaker, not a political event, and to prove that, this was a community event, and Brian lives in the constituency of St. Barnabas. And at this time, the member for St. Barnabas should be clapping his two hands and be grateful for the member in his area. And of course, we got a call this morning that that same university is extending another full ride for a student. The students are being evaluated now in the pool for a full ride, any discipline. And of course, the member for GG also had a powerful college fair. And listen, we are stronger together. Yes, we are PLPs, but we are also nationalists. And we want you to know that what we're doing is really not for show. It's all about building stronger communities, providing opportunities for children. These are our tomorrow's future, and we must invest in them. And so that is what we're doing. And of course, Florida Memorial University, they quickly came. I think they found out like 2 days before the event, and they was here. And of course, thanks to Dr. Clyde Lewis, he's giving a partial scholarship. Most of the students are waiting for their SAT results. They'll be given that. Of course, my alma mater, Bahamas Baptist Community College, Dr. Reed was gracious. She gave 50% off for an associate degree to 2 students, male, female, for their full ride. And so we thank God. Thank you, Dr. Reed. And we'll also like to thank the Spence Finlayson Show and the Darrell Miller Show Live, who was on the ground. I need not to say how that went. He did a phenomenal job. And of course, I want the residents to know in Marathon at this time, I want to thank the environmental health. Of course, they are on the ground now. Bulk waste are being collected. So for all residents who are listening in, please take your bulk waste in the front of your gate. If you have dogs, over the gate, just know that we have persons riding around, and so they'll be collecting the bulk waste. We have 7 days of this. I think we get 4 more days left. And so please, I thank you for participating in this. And of course, I would like to thank I got an invite from Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church. I would like to thank them for their invitation. I would say this is the second time in my whole life going to attend a Seventh-day Adventist church on Saturday. So Elder Christopher Gale, this is located in Elizabeth Estates. I thank God I'm going to be there to worship with them. And of course, another invite for Sunday is Abundant Life Church. They're having their media and music department highlighting Bahamian worship. And of course, I would be there to celebrate with them. I thank God. I thank the senior pastor, Cranston Knowles, and Jill Maycock. And Madam Speaker, I would like to say when the Lord has, I'm sure, finished with me in politics, whenever that be, I am going to serve in the church. I didn't say I'm going to be a pastor, but I'll be serving full-time with the Lord. And of course, Madam Speaker, as I stand in support of this resolution, I want the Bahamian people to know that the matters involving human rights belongs to everyone from birth to death. The beauty of human rights is that it has no boundaries. It is for the poor to the rich, from the custodian to the CEO, from the homeless on the street to those of you who are living in your big mansions. And of course, Madam Speaker, I am about the business of the small man. Many of them may not know their rights, and I thank my colleagues who have spoken on the issue, and they have spoken at length. So I will not go into all the rights that they have. I'm not going to do that because my colleagues have already done that. So I'll be very brief. Madam Speaker, as I stand in support of this resolution, because its purpose, once implemented, will contribute to the strengthening of our human rights record. Human rights violations are enemies of progress. This is one of the most powerful strategies that can defeat human rights violations and other forms of social decay. I truly believe that this resolution tightens the system of accountability and transparency. I therefore support the United Nations initiative that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights. Every one of us that sit in this parliament, Madam Speaker, we play a critical role in our country's compliance with its human rights obligations on the regional and international stage. Moreover, establishing a committee for monitoring the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas can be an important facilitator to strengthening our stability. Madam Speaker, while the Bahamas is one of the most stable economies in the Western Hemisphere, the number of homicides in New Providence is absolutely overshadowing the hospitable and peaceful nature of Bahamians, whether woman or man. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the Amnesty International Report 2020, it highlighted one of the human rights issues in the Bahamas, and that being the degrading treatment of prisoners and harsh prison conditions. The good news is that the Amnesty report also states that the government mechanisms in place were able to identify and punish people who commit human rights abuses. And according to Amnesty International, many nations have a much bigger problem than the Bahamas. The report describes the increase around the world as shocking. The Bahamas is demonstrating determination to beat this challenge. Yes, we have a headroom for improvement. There is always room for better. But I submit for our consideration, Madam Speaker, that the government of the Bahamas is using the mechanism, this proposed Human Rights Committee, to put a deeper dent in this problem. Madam Speaker, what stands out most to me about the benefits of this committee being formed is twofold. One, this resolution will increase and accelerate our ability to diminish human rights abuses. Secondly, this resolution further empowers us to have adequate mechanisms in place to promote, preserve, and protect our human rights. Madam Speaker, the irony of it all is that our family islands, for the most part, have little to no crime. If we are able to separate the level of crime and human rights issues in Nassau from the level of human rights abuses in our family islands, we would probably be ranked at the top of the world's index. In other words, we would be the best in the world, but we're not. The countries that top the chart as the best countries in the world that seems to have minimal human rights issues are Iceland, New Zealand, Denmark, Portugal, Slovenia, Ireland, Finland, Canada, and Australia. Let us reach for the top. Let us soar like these countries or even better, Madam Speaker. This Parliament's desire to constitute a committee to be responsible for the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas can meaningfully contribute to the restoration of a culture of peace in Nassau and the protection and preservation of peace in our family islands, and by extension, remaining compliant with international standards. Madam Speaker, key to the maximized impact of this resolution is the strength of our commitment to the enforcement of human rights. In simple terms, matters that comes before this committee must be enforced. I am sure we can all say that there are many laws and many things that sit on the shelf that are not enforced. But for this one, the matters that comes before the committee must be enforced. Let us all renew our commitment to do our part to ensure that the Bahamas is the greatest little country in the world. This resolution can help us achieve our goal, Madam Speaker. I wholeheartedly support this resolution, and Marathon supports this resolution. And Madam Speaker, before taking my seat, because I still have 14 minutes, but I'll give you 2 minutes. I dare not forget that on Saturday, I accompanied Mrs. Anne-Marie Davis and her team to Cat Island, where we celebrated Earth Day. It was celebrated all over the world on that day. And Earth Day is an annual global event that calls on communities and nations around the world to shift towards sustainable practices. And of course, it was my pleasure and honor to be among those organizers of that event, the Cat Island United, a nonprofit organization. There were so many tourists on those grounds, so many tourists in Old Bight, so many. And of course, Mrs. Davis declared, as she addressed the audience, she said that every day should be Earth Day. Her declaration resonated in my soul, and with a burst of inspiration and realization that Cat Island can be a model for the world to experience. And I salute the people of Cat Island. Their hospitality and entrepreneurial progression is completely outstanding. And of course, Mrs. Davis also practically helped to equip the residents of Cat Island with the planting of the breadfruit tree. When somebody hears about the breadfruit tree, they think it's just some simple tree. No, it isn't. Around the world, the breadfruit tree is known as the tree that feeds. It can feed a family up to 4 years. Fried breadfruit, baked breadfruit, bread, porridge, anything. And so there was a planting ceremony both in Old Bight and in Arthurstown. And so on that note, Madam Speaker, those of us, I'm sure, who have constituencies and you want to ensure that your residents are thinking about food security, I'm sure that they can reach out to the Office of the Spouse of the Prime Minister if you want a breadfruit planted. I'm sure the heart she has, she would not turn you down. Madam Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Pleasant good afternoon to you and to the parliamentary colleagues and those watching across the length and breadth of the Bahamas. Good afternoon. Special greeting especially to the great people of Central Grand Bahama, who I'm eternally proud to represent in this house. I know my wife and daughters, they're watching. To the great community of Waterkey. Madam Speaker, before I get into the crux of my presentation, I would like to, on a more somber note, bring condolences to those who are presently going through Sorrow's Valley. I want to offer special condolences to the Russell family, Francine Russell and her family, her sibling on the passing of her father and a friend of mine, and Mr. Gary Russell, who passed away yesterday. I am sure this must be extremely hard on that family in that they just buried their mother, Hortense Tensi, last October. So I want to offer special condolences to that family, and also to a good friend of mine, Pastor Emeritus Michael Pinder, whose wife died suddenly yesterday morning. Michael Pinder's wife died, Stella died yesterday, yes, from Upper Zion Baptist Church. She died suddenly yesterday in the States. So I've reached out to him, and he has expressed to me that in all his years, he's never experienced so much sorrows. So I want us to reach out and offer some love and support to Pastor Pinder and the membership at Upper Zion Baptist Church. Madam Speaker, I'm not sure if the member from Marathon was peeping my speech, because my next shout out goes out to all of us who recognize or understand the importance of food security. So special shout out to those persons from the Trees That Feed Foundation, Mike and Mary McLaughlin, and Dr. Ken Banks, who are partnering with us to bring trees to the Bahamas that feeds our people, and in particular, like was noted, the breadfruit tree. And we have quite a bit of breadfruit trees at our farm in Grand Bahama. And I want to say thanks to my sister-in-law, Terrell Tynes Wilson, who's in Tampa, who introduced me to those wonderful individuals. And I also want to say thank you to our local partners and persons like the spouse of the Prime Minister, the member from Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, who, as was indicated, is very active in that movement. We have other partners like Mr. Pericles Millis, Mr. Marvin Pinder, Michael Litton. We have a crew from Abaco, all actively involved in food security. You know, I want us in the Bahamas to take this matter serious and let us be more interested in feeding ourselves than our international partners. Madam Speaker, I want to get right into substantial crux of my presentation on this resolution to constitute a parliamentary committee to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. I indeed echo the words of the United Nations in that human rights are inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human right includes the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom from opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and of course, the right to proper health care. And something I want to note in this parliament, over the last few weeks and months, I've never seen so many appeals going out for blood. Every day on social media, you get 6 or 7 flyers, different persons needing blood. Don't know what's going on in this country, but our blood bank needs to be serviced. All of our service clubs in this country, including our parliamentarians, I'm not sure people want our blood, but we need to go and service the blood bank. We have the service organizations like Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Club, and other social, and the churches. We need to pay attention to this matter. And the right to health care, Madam Speaker, I noticed that the member for Tall Pines is not here. I want to mention a matter, a health concern that I had. I was in Freeport a few Fridays ago, wife and I driving home, and we came across an accident. 3 cars were involved and quite a number of individuals. At least 6 persons were lying along the roadside injured. The ambulance came. Of course, the EMS responded fast. The service was quick. They were on the scene, and they had a difficulty. 1 ambulance, 1 stretcher. They had about 6 or so injured on the ground, and one of the persons that was injured had a broken leg and a dislocated ankle, and was sitting up trying to support herself because the airbag had deployed into her chest. And I was there helping as best as I could to support. And, you know, God bless the EMS came there with the bag. And all of a sudden she said, I need light. It was dark. The EMS didn't have any lights. Either there was none in the ambulance or they didn't have it. In Grand Bahama, yes, on a Friday evening. Fortunately, all of us have smartphones. I pulled out my smartphone, turned on the flashlight, and was able to illuminate the bag further, get the medicine out, and others on the scene brought their phones and they turned lights on to help with the scene. So whatever equipment we need to ensure that we have proper rights to health care, emergency health care, we need to ensure that those apparatus, those equipment are in place. Madam Speaker, we know that the Bahamas has proudly been a part of several regional and international human rights accords. Our position on these bodies have allowed us, as a country, to play on the big stage, so to speak. We, as a country, understand better than any other how important the rights of our people are and how important it is to ensure those rights are protected at all times. We boast of having one of the best democracies in the free world, with the independence and impartiality of our judiciary, free and fair elections, and of course, the peaceful transfer or transition of power. I believe that the rights of the people of a country truly represents the strength of the democracy. So yes, this resolution is indeed important, and I will repeat that. I believe that the rights of the people of a country truly represents the strength of their democracy. So yes, this resolution is indeed very important. However, Madam Speaker, in the same right, we still have a very long way to go. Madam Speaker, every year, as was indicated by the member from East Grand Bahama, the Bahamas is subjected to a report by the United States Department of State on our human rights practices, along with the other United Nations member states. But Madam Speaker, every year, we are admonished for things like the prison condition, as was indicated, the enforcement of corruption laws. We know there's so much more to do to ensure the protection of the people that live in this country, especially the Bahamians. We recognize that with this resolution, the committee will be empowered to assess all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. It measures the level at which human rights in the Bahamas is consistent with the Bahamas' regional and global obligations, and report to Parliament every 3 months, according to this resolution, with a view of guiding the legislative process. The committee will have to report on the measures designed to improve the quality of life and status of all people, including the most vulnerable and marginalized group, particularly, Madam Speaker, in the context of climate change, sustainable development, and I want to add food security. This, Madam Speaker, we believe is a noble effort. I want to remind this noble House of another noble effort, or remind this honorable House of another noble effort. Earlier, and I want us all to pay attention to this, you may not like it, but earlier this year, this session, the official opposition urged this New Day government to take a serious stand on the immigration problem we now face. Madam Speaker, early this year, the official opposition urged this New Day government to take a serious stand on the immigration problem we now face. The official opposition leader, the member for Marco City, suggested terms of reference to the Select Committee for the Immigration Crisis. But this New Day government voted against it. That's a serious matter. Our leader, along with our team, suggested terms of reference to the Select Committee on Immigration, and we turned it down. We didn't see the urgency there at all. No urgency. But we do recognize that there seems to be urgency in this move. Madam Speaker, I believe it is important to note that while I may not be against the resolution, this country currently has so many other matters that needs to be prioritized. I want to pose a few questions to the New Day administration. I understand that governments can sometimes be driven by global consideration. I'm not against it. I'm against the timing of this whole process. Where is our priority? What is really driving this? Every day when we walk into this house, we see the rights of fellow Bahamians, fellow people, tampered with. Whether it's them not feeling safe or not having the basic support to provide the day-to-day needs for themselves and their families. We have so many issues locally. Instead of focusing on these issues, we are debating, like I said last week, sloop sailing, Central Bank Act, I once again raise concern to the fact that nothing, and I say it again, substantial in my view, was done in this Parliament to highlight the needs and protection of our children during Child Protection Month. Yes, we laid a bill last March sometime, but what do we do during this month? The children are not being protected. They're not given priority. The youth are not empowered. Since my last presentation last week, when I talk about the importance of us getting together and holding hands, looking out, seeking out those who may be lost in the sawgrass of crime, of drugs, of violence, of abuse. A young mother was crying on Monday over the loss of 2 sons, murdered at the same time. We just said, let's hold hands, let's see what we can do to protect our families, to prevent the mother from crying out and saying, why didn't we hold hands yesterday? Monday morning, or awoken early Saturday morning to the news that 2 of our sons were murdered. We need to set goals. We need to devise a plan, and we need to act in unison, and we need to do it now. When will the Bahamian people be the priority of this new government, of this Parliament? Madam Speaker, Bahamians are ready for relief. They want more. Our people deserve more. They're looking to us. Our people are relying on us. As always, Madam Speaker, I was asked by the member for West Coast Bahama about my timing, and I told him I'll be my regular under 15 minutes. And I stick to that. I'm a man to my word. As always, we want this administration to do well, because governments are continuous. The official opposition is always here to provide bipartisan support for this New Day government, and I'm continually honored and grateful for this responsibility to be a representative for the great people of Central Grand Bahama, and I will continue to do my part to advance our country towards continued progressive development. Madam Speaker, colleagues, Central Grand Bahama stands in support of this resolution.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As always, I'm grateful to Almighty God for this opportunity to once again be in the House, lending my voice to the cause of helping with the empowerment of our people and accepting fully our role as facilitators for the development of the Bahamian people. Madam Speaker, after all, we are here to help them achieve their dreams and aspirations. Madam Speaker, today, we have unanimously on our side indicated our support for this resolution to set up a select committee to examine all matters related to the delivery of proper human rights in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and to join with other countries globally that seek to do the same. Madam Speaker, my colleagues have adequately made the point that we have been on this path before during this sitting and have sought to enlist, to engage the government and to get from them a commitment for us to work in a truly bipartisan way on matters that affect the development of our people. We are clear that that is not a commitment this government is prepared to make. In each case where you have seen a commitment to a bipartisan approach, it has been when the government proposes it, we do an evaluation and we make a determination this is in the best interest of the Bahamian people. Madam Speaker, we listen intently to the statements made relative to the establishment of this select committee. And with very few exceptions on the government side, we did not hear them drill down on the areas of the violation of human rights in the Bahamas and to indicate that the select committee that we are establishing are going to deal with the following violations of human rights in the Bahamas. If you're setting up a select committee, Madam Speaker, you are setting it up with a view of examining the range of issues that affect the lives of the people in our country and how to improve it. And so Madam Speaker, what concerns me is that the government wishes to tick a box, which we believe to be an international obligation in showing that we are setting up a committee to call for papers, to call for our persons who would talk about the various areas where there's a violation of human rights. However, we did not hear, Madam Speaker, the wide range of areas where we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are violations of human rights in the Bahamas. And here's a government that's going to enumerate them. In other words, say, here are the areas, and here's what we have been doing, and here is what we are about to do through this committee. And that causes concern, Madam Speaker. And so for a brief while, Madam Speaker, I wish to, as we did on this side, identify some of the challenges that we have so that it is a meaningful discussion. We heard a lot about our history, and we support our history. In fact, the Free National Movement has been a part of helping to chart the course of the empowerment of Bahamians of all ethnicities, but in particular those of African descent. We were a part of that struggle. We contributed to that struggle. And so, Madam Speaker, what we heard from a number of the speakers is a retelling of a familiar but necessary tale of struggle by people who were disenfranchised, whose rights were not observed, who had to fight for their rights and achieve it through decades of struggle. And Madam Speaker, that's a good story. It's a story we should tell as often as we can. But Walter Rodney made an interesting point. He says history is absolutely important and necessary, but history should be secondary to us tackling the present challenges before us. And what this administration is good on is telling that story, but they are challenged when it comes to making the connection between that story and what people expect of us now to do in their defense or in their interest. Because if you are a victim of the violation of human rights and you listen to it today, the question is, did you hear some proposals by this administration that would give you hope that, look here, something is about to happen when eight members join this particular committee? And I would submit, Madam Speaker, that few persons believe the needle is going to be moved based on what they would have heard. So, for example, Madam Speaker, just before I go there specifically, Madam Speaker, there was a bit of history about the formation of the United Nations. When the United Nations were formed, Madam Speaker, and I agree with colleagues, it was formed as an intergovernmental organization. There was a view that the world should not return to what we experienced in World War II. There was a view that we needed to find a way through diplomacy to resolve differences, to head off potential catastrophic events through negotiations and discussions and meeting. Madam Speaker, the United Nations learned very quickly after it was formed as an intergovernmental agency that governments are not the only actors on behalf of its citizens. In other words, they recognized that there were many member countries who had citizens who were underserved or not served at all by their governments. Some because of a scarcity of resources, some because their priorities didn't calculate that they needed to work diligently on behalf of everybody. There were always special interest groups that some governments focus on. And so the United Nations then did an interesting thing that is relevant to what we're discussing. The United Nations then started organizing a series of meetings to allow non-governmental organizations who were targeting groups within various countries so that those underserved communities' needs would be met. And that's how you get all of these NGOs on climate change, because often governments were not the leaders on climate change. They were perpetrators through the industrial plant. Women's issues that were marginalized, and again, many non-governmental organizations emerged with a view of addressing the suffering of the marginalized and disenfranchised people. Young people's issues needed to be mainstreamed, like women's issue, mainstream across societies. And so the United Nations, in its wisdom, permitted a series of global conferences alongside intergovernmental global conferences because many citizens needed to be served, and the only groups that were serving them adequately were non-governmental organizations. I said that all of that, Madam Speaker, to say this, that as we set up this committee, there are many such non-governmental organizations that are out there whose voices need to be heard, who the public has trust in because they believe that those persons are concerned about the transformation of Bahamian lives, who are on the margins of this society or who have slipped through the cracks in this society. Because unfortunately, many of our citizens have become quite cynical about traditional political organizations, Madam Speaker. And I understand why. That's why, Madam Speaker, I've said about some members on the other side, that when they speak, they sound like activists. And no doubt on our side, we probably have the same problem. But when you are in the chair, you're no longer merely an activist. You have the reins of power, and you should try solve some of these problems. So, Madam Speaker, one of the challenges we have in terms of the violation of human rights is the inequality that exists between genders. And I'm only talking about two here, male and female. Madam Speaker, we've missed multiple opportunities as a country to give women the right to pass on citizenship to their children, and unwedded fathers who may have a child overseas to pass on. So we've missed some opportunities, but primarily among Bahamian women, we've missed the opportunity. That's one. We've missed the opportunity, Madam Speaker, and that's both parties, Madam Speaker. We have missed the opportunity to send the clearest possible message in the shortest period of time that violence against girls and women is unacceptable. So here we are today, setting up a committee to examine issues without listing these very serious issues. And one of the reasons the government wouldn't list these very serious issues is because they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity right now to introduce the bills to make the final decisions on these matters, but have decided not to. We have the child protection bill that's on the agenda. We could bring it. One way to show the commitment is to demonstrate a sense of urgency in bringing these matters, Madam Speaker, to bringing them now. And so Madam Speaker, so when you hear the talk about what the intentions are, you honestly, Madam Speaker, you have to fight the cynicism, because there is a very real opportunity for members of this government to demonstrate its commitment by bringing the bill. We had the member for West End and Bimini held a consultation for which we applauded him on the issue relative to whether or not a woman could be raped within the context of a marriage. We have other members of the team who sit in the very same cabinet, Madam Speaker, who clearly says, these matters are not a priority for us. The question is, Madam Speaker, whether you decide on whatever terms you're going to use and how you define whether a woman can be violated in the context of marriage, should we not have a broader education campaign and a discussion with the population in a meaningful way with a sense of urgency, given the level of violence that's going on in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Madam Speaker, girls and women are being are killed in this country, are being assaulted in this country. No, this is not new, Madam Speaker, but it's happening now, and it's happening now at an alarming rate. And there is no sense of urgency in this administration that is in charge of coordinating the various stakeholders to address the carnage in general that's happening in our streets, in our homes, in our schools, and the carnage against girls and women. There isn't a sense of urgency. Madam Speaker. So when we talk about setting up these committees, the question is, will this now spur the kind of action that has long been needed and, in my view, not being dealt with? So when we talk about protecting people's rights, the right to ownership of land, the right to earn a living, to invest in the things that are important to you. Well, Madam Speaker, we have a number of families in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas who've lost their homes through eminent domain, where government seized their property for the reconfiguration of roads. We are giving settlements to all kinds of people who are already wealthy, never lost a day of salary, were embarrassed because we may have made some, and in some cases did make some boneheaded decisions about their relocation. But Madam Speaker, there are some other people who have lost their home, lost their land, and we can't settle them. We won't. Up to today, there are still people waiting for redress. Some people who've unfortunately suffered loss of limb or life in some of our institutions can't be settled. But the connected could be settled. The high profile could be settled. All of these are human rights issues that we refuse to deal with. Madam Speaker, I listened to the member for Long Island, and as he laid out the case for many persons, particularly in the United States, he used examples, but he did cite some examples in the Bahamas, where there are persons who have lost their life or been injured while in custody. And Madam Speaker, we agree, the overwhelming majority of our officers in the various uniformed branches are doing a stellar job, are absolutely committed to upholding the law, to detection, to interdiction, to enforcement, to prevention, etc. But Madam Speaker, there are some who have given law enforcement a bad name, and the act of accelerating the work of the coroner's court, accelerating the establishment of a working civilian group that has oversight for the behavior of law enforcement, by accelerating, Madam Speaker, inquiries in matters that stink to high heaven surrounding deaths of young Bahamians. Madam Speaker, the way in which we protect the reputation of the establishment, that is, of the executive, the way we protect the reputation of law enforcement is to lay bare an examination of circumstances surrounding the death of Bahamians. Because what that does is those that may have conspiracy theories, or those who may have legitimate concerns, or the dots do not connect for them in the circumstances surrounding a loved one's death. We are demonstrating as a society, we are prepared in a very transparent way to look at the matter, to adjudicate it carefully, so that people do not develop deeper mistrust of those who are the gatekeepers of this country. Madam Speaker, there's nothing controversial about that. That's straightforward. It's about helping to clear the name of those of us who sit in here and those out there who are on the front line making sacrifices, leaving their children to defend the rest of the country. But when we fail to act in a transparent way, discuss the circumstances around why somebody died, why they were maimed, we then leave the system up for ridicule and for suspicion, Madam Speaker. And we've had several very high-profile cases, Madam Speaker, recently that we have no logical explanations for. And these are serious matters, Madam Speaker, that we need to address. Madam Speaker, as we have this discussion today, we have a chance to do some real work and to do it at a pace where people believe that we actually care. It is true, Madam Speaker, that we spend more time sometimes trading in insults, and Madam Speaker, and since in sheer numbers is more them than us, in fact, we are often responding to the insults than actually collaborating, Madam Speaker, on working on some serious issues that affect us. Madam Speaker, let me go very quickly. I know time is short. Again, as we look at the Bahamas 2021 Human Rights Report that has been put together by our neighbor to the north, let's acknowledge this fact. The United States has a myriad of problems. And Madam Speaker, much like the OECD and a number of the European countries who unfairly put pressure on the financial services community in the Bahamas to comply with regulations they themselves are not complying with. They continue to set up these goalposts for us to hit as a country in terms of financial targets, in terms of our regulatory regime that they themselves are not complying with. Despite that fact, Madam Speaker, we are still duty-bound to do everything possible to make sure that we have a system that is free of resources or monies flowing through it from criminal origins or headed for some other nefarious activity. We still have an obligation, though we take issue with the unlevel playing field in the financial services arena globally. Similarly, Madam Speaker, we often look at with jaundiced eyes at those countries who want to look in and talk about our human rights record when they themselves historically have had a horrible human rights record, even then and in many ways now. And as you look at the United Nations, many of those who joined the committee to look at human rights are some of the countries with the worst record in terms of human rights. But having said all of that, that does not excuse us from doing what we ought to do. So I would have expected that the government, in bringing this resolution, would have come in and identified the list of gaps in our system as it relates to protecting human rights and say, here is what we are determined to do. The detention center, Madam Speaker, is one example. We have long known that it is a facility that's crying out for transformation. It has given this country a black eye over and over and over again. And so it is my hope that in the wrap-up, the government would talk about its willingness to make sure that the commissioners from the OAS, from the Human Rights Division of the OAS, would be invited once again to come to the Bahamas. We should actually demonstrate. Yes, that's fine, but I will recommend it to you through the public. That's the only way it seemed to make a difference. And so, Madam Speaker, if we are serious about transforming the detention center, why not have the commissioners come in to examine up and down Fox Hill, the corrections facility, the detention center, so that we could clearly demonstrate that we are making progress. It cannot be year after year, it's the same issue. We are spending as a government millions of dollars under both the Progressive Liberal Party administration and the Free National Movement administration, paying attorneys and paying victims who have been trapped in our system, who have not had their matters heard in a timely fashion. Some persons, Madam Speaker, have been kept up to 8 years, some longer, some 7 years, some 5 years, awaiting deportation. We heard the government talk about its victory at the Privy Council recently. If the government wished to be transparent, they would have come and fully explained what occurred at the Privy Council. Instead, they came and I heard them savage an attorney saying that they were focused on getting money, but it was struck down by the Privy Council. They didn't mention that on the matter of law, that the government did not win a case. What the government was successful in doing is making sure that the quantum that was being asked for was not the quantum that they got. I think it was an increase by about $50,000. So,
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Freetown.
Misrepresents the effect of the Privy Council decision. Privy Council, in fact, decided that you could be deported one of 3 ways: only one of them requiring you to be taken to court, and the two others requiring you not to go to court, which has in fact reversed a concession wrongly given. So the Privy Council in fact found that the minister responsible for immigration can order your deportation without you going to court.
No, Madam Speaker,
Honourable Member.
here's the point. Here's the point, Madam Speaker. The reality is the Progressive Liberal Party, the Free National Movement, under both of our administrations, persons have been held in Fox Hill for an inordinate amount of time. And we have spent tens of millions of dollars compensating people because of the violation of their human rights. And we expected that this administration, in appointing, bringing this resolution, would come and say, that will not happen on our watch. That will not happen on. And so under the Free National Movement's leadership, under my leadership, we will make sure we do not function in that way. We would make sure, Madam Speaker, that these important bills that ought to be brought here to give relief to Bahamians, we'll bring the bills here. We wouldn't be pussyfooting around, Madam Speaker, dilly-dallying on these important provisions. This administration had an opportunity to help thousands of young people have their records expunged for small quantities of marijuana. We're still leaving them out there languishing until the Attorney General, in his supreme wisdom, decide that he's going to bring a bill here to make sure we expunge those records. Wherever it's within our power to bring relief.
The chair recognizes you.
Clearly, the member for Marco City did not see me sitting here in the House signing a bunch of expungement.
That's not
for
the point.
people for the very same thing. Clearly, he is unaware that the records all come off after 5 years, and in the case of young people, after 2.5 years. Clearly, he is unaware of that.
Madam Speaker, in fact, what the member just said flies in the face of what all of us discussed, including with the member for West End and Bimini, where we know that we have the ability to make a universal decision that all of those persons who have a certain quantity of marijuana for personal use, that we have the ability, that you don't need merely the minister with discretionary power determining who records will be expunged, that it can be done broadly. And we were sure in this House, members on their feet said, we will bring a bill in order to address that issue when we bring the compendium of bills surrounding marijuana or cannabis. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm just making the point that where we can give relief to Bahamians, we should move quickly, Madam Speaker, to provide the relief. And so Madam Speaker, what we are hoping to hear in the wrap-up is those gaps in our system that exist, so that we are able to, what is the government going to do to plug those gaps? Where there is equality in the application of the law. That if somebody, Madam Speaker, if Joe Public is accused of a very serious crime, let's just say hypothetically, assault and rape, that there is a procedure, a process that the government uses to address that particular issue. That should apply then to all citizens in an equal manner. Madam Speaker, right now in this system, depending on who you are and where you sit, the government, it appears, move at a certain pace for one group of people, and another group of people, Madam Speaker, they move at a different pace, Madam Speaker.
Yes. Chair recognizes the
I
honourable
think the
member
member for Marco City may not understand the purpose of the committee, which would be to examine.
Madam Speaker, this member cannot say what I understand. That in his arrogance, he continues to say it.
I withdraw that absolutely.
In his arrogance, he continues to say it. He doesn't.
I withdraw that.
He had a chance to speak, Madam Speaker. What is the point of order?
The point of order. The point of order. If you'd sit down, you'd hear it.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, honourable members, honourable members, members,
Mr. Speaker.
members.
That the member for Marco City, having now finished with what he wished to say, the point of order is, Madam Speaker, that the member for Marco City mischaracterizes who is responsible for prosecutions. Contrary to what they have fail to grasp, and in their administration, they don't observe it. The Constitution, which is what we're talking about here, empowers the Commissioner of Police only to deal with that, and not the government. This government doesn't involve itself with prosecutions. They did.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Please, 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 please. Madam Speaker, addressing the issue of human rights, addressing the issue of human rights, Madam Speaker, requires a sober, honest discussion with the public. We could say all kinds of things about what we do or do not do. That public out there know what is happening. And it stinks to high heaven, Madam Speaker. I have lived, Madam Speaker, in inner city communities the majority of my life. I know there is an uneven way in which justice in this country is dispensed, Madam Speaker. In fact, Madam Speaker, in every jurisdiction, that's why there's an examination of the system from the point of investigation and arrest all the way through the prosecution. Because there are flaws in the system. There are gaps in the system. Wherever those gaps exist, there are violations of human rights. We should be having a sober, honest conversation about how we are going to fix those gaps. That's a part of it. So they can talk all they want theoretically. The streets know what the reality is. And because the streets no longer trust the system and often don't trust policymakers, that's why you have so much street justice. That isn't justice at all. But it's a carnage of our young people. So they can play as cute as they want. We know that they can influence who's investigated and who's not. That's the view, Madam Speaker. They can deny it all they want. They can deny it all they want. That's their business. That's their business. That's their business. And so, Madam Speaker, we embrace this committee. We embrace this committee, Madam Speaker. But what we want is fair adjudication. We want a setting of a priority list for this particular committee that is serious about examining our system and the gaps in the system and how we might correct the gaps in the system, Madam Speaker. The whole issue of how we treat the detainees is important, Madam Speaker, to show our humanity. Let's just demonstrate that year after year we are improving. We could be tough on crime, but humane in the execution of our job, Madam Speaker. There are blatant cases, Madam Speaker, where it appears to this particular public that certain people, the doors of opportunities are flung wide open, while others are placed on a list that makes it increasingly difficult for them to have their right to an opportunity to earn a living respected and facilitated by the system that they pay taxes into, Madam Speaker. These are human rights issues. It does involve people, Madam Speaker, as was mentioned before, who are disabled, but it also involves people who we deliberately disenfranchise because we don't follow the law in terms of the procurement system. There are people who are locked out of this system depending on who is in power. And this administration, Madam Speaker, can determine who eats and who don't eat. That's not true. They determine who eat and who do not eat if you require, or you desire rather, a contract with government. Madam, it is our right. It is our right as citizens, if we are playing by the rules, to apply for an opportunity to provide a goods or a service for this system, for the Bahamas, the country where we live, and not be blocked because somebody is controlling the levels of power in this country, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, let me say, Madam Speaker, that today we support this committee. But what we do not support is having it appointed as a charade to give this government an opportunity to tick a box to go in the international community and say that we are committed to addressing this. We are saying there are sufficient examples of pieces of legislation that they could have brought already, which would have been emblematic of what they would do through this particular committee, Madam Speaker. So we will participate enthusiastically, Madam Speaker, on the committee. We will have our members serve, but we serve notice. We do not intend to be placeholders on the committee, and we will bring to the public's attention where if this committee does not meet on a regular basis and does not report. We should establish, Madam Speaker, a baseline of the various gaps across our system where there are human rights violations. And year by year, we should track whether or not we are making progress in each of these areas, Madam Speaker. The issues we're dealing with here are issues of life and death. And it is our hope that this government would work vigilantly, diligently in conjunction, not just with us, but also with stakeholders, Madam Speaker, who are committed. Yeah, it's so much our job, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have government officials who are prepared, Madam Speaker, to try and discourage non-governmental organizations from bringing action against the government by discouraging them by saying the costs against you for bringing the action, you're going to pay the cost for the government attorneys and for your own attorneys. And that's a means, Madam Speaker, of not facilitating inquiry, but trying to discourage opposition or inquiry of government officials. And so, Madam Speaker, we support the appointment of this committee, but we do not see in the presentations thus far the government laying out the various issues that have to be addressed and that they intend to address through this committee. Marco City and the Free National Movement, we support the resolution.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Freetown.
Wish to interrupt Marco City more. And so that's why I didn't want to do it more. But he referred to something that was said by Long Island that I wouldn't want to leave on the record that is inaccurate when they suggested there's no civilian oversight of the police. The Police Force Act, which was passed by the Ingram administration, Long Island talked about the police investigating police. Section 78 of the Police Force Act says the minister shall appoint a body of persons to be known as the Police Complaints Inspectorate, who shall undertake such actions as is prescribed by this act. And the function is to review the investigation and determination of complaints by the Complaint and Corruption Branch established under this act, report to the minister, and review reports. The makeup of that Complaints Inspectorate is a lawyer, an attorney of law of not less than 10 years standing, or a person retired from the force at the rank of superintendent or above. You can't be on the committee if you're a parliamentarian, was a parliamentarian 5 years prior, or was a police officer 5 years prior. The current chairman of the inspectorate is Tanya McCartney, who was appointed by the administration, led by Dr. Minnis, and her appointment was continued. On the committee also is Mike Mora. I think that's the gentleman from, no, not Mike Mora, sorry. The chap from Civil Society. Matt Albury, and a number of others. And there's one retired superintendent who's been retired for ages. So there is civilian oversight of the police, and they've suggested greater oversight. And the Force Inspectorate, which was initiated by the Minnis administration, has continued to be advanced. And the comparison of our progress in human rights matters is exactly what Centerville said. The Honorable Attorney General will be carrying the report that does track that. So all of that happens now, and a committee who has concern about whether it happens would be able to investigate and see that it does.
Madam Speaker, since the member for Freetown invoked my name towards the end of his presentation, he did make the point that we called for greater oversight of matters related to police action. Madam Speaker, I also mentioned that I noticed he did not talk about the need for public inquiries into any number of cases where there have been deaths of young Bahamians when they have come in contact with the police. Madam Speaker, we could be as technical as we wish in this place, but the reality is the Bahamian people know the system is broken. Not just that, it's broken, Madam Speaker, where you have a backlog, certainly in the coroner's court. We have a backlog, Madam Speaker, in the inquiries into police-related shootings. We have a backlog in cases where citizens are killing citizens. Madam Speaker, we should focus on how we can increase our intensity, allocate more resources, demonstrate to persons who are praying and hoping that we would help provide relief. We should demonstrate a sense of urgency. That's the point, Madam Speaker, that's more important to be on the record.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Engliston.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand on behalf of the excellent people of Engliston, described as an inner city community with some of the finest Bahamians you will ever find in this country. And I wish to contribute to this important resolution. But before I do so, I wanted to pay tribute to the former Director of Education and really an iconic figure in the history of our nation. Yes. And that is in the likeness of Marjorie Davis, who recently died. And I want to just give a brief overview of her. One of the things that Dr. Gail Sanders noted in her history book is that not much is written about women and their contribution to our history. And I don't know what the reason is for that. We can contemplate and we can speculate. But I think that it's very important that we highlight the contribution of women, particularly where that contribution has been so significant. And I just want to give you a brief overview of this fine woman who gave her life to this country. And her name was Marjorie Davis. She was the first female director of education and the former chief commissioner of the Bahamas Girl Guides Association. She was born in Nassau on the 2nd of November, 1928, and is the second of 12 children born to the late Sir Cyrus Ulysses, a papal knight, and Mrs. Hilda Davis. She began her early education at Mrs. Cassina Kinner's private school, and then the Western Junior and Senior High Schools. She attended Government High School, where she was a prefect and head girl. Her tertiary education, bearing in mind now, she was born in 1928, at a time when Black men did not go to university, much less a Black woman. She attended the University of Toronto in Canada, where she obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1949. She would have been 21 at the time, and the secondary school teaching certificate in 1950. Following her studies for almost 20 years, Ms. Davis taught a number of subjects, the main one being Latin at the Government High School. She taught bookkeeping to adults at the Aquinas College and evening classes. In 1965, she received a one-year Commonwealth bursary and obtained an advanced diploma in education at the University of Hull Institute of Education in England. She established the guidance and counseling program at Government High School, and in 1970 completed the Master of Degree in Education program at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. For the next 18 years, she was involved in extensive innovations in education, including the expansion of secondary schools, in technical and vocational education, in special education, as well as the establishment of the Learning Resources Unit in 1977. Ms. Davis became the first female director of education in the Bahamas, a post she held for 11 years. She assumed administrative duties at the Department of Education and after teaching for 20 years at Government High. During those decades, she was privileged to have tutored many of the leaders and professionals who have been and are making outstanding contributions to this country. In 1988, she accepted the post of coordinator of the Bahamas General Certificate of Secondary Education, and with the support and hard work of relevant teams of subject specialists trained by the Cambridge University Local Examination Syndicate, the first sitting came on stream in 1993, and the rest is history. She was a charter member of the Zonta Club of Nassau, serving as chairperson of the Education Committee. And as I indicated, her role in the Girl Guides Association. She was an avid member of her church, St. Francis Xavier Cathedral, where she taught catechism and religious education. And she's been a long-term member of the Legion of Mary, a ministry dedicated to visiting the sick and elderly. She was also an oblate of St. Martin Monastery. And she has a very, very long list, but she was honored by her nation with the OBE, and additionally, she was honored by her church, by being made Dame by His Holiness Pope Francis, the honor of Dame of the Pontifical Equestrian Order of Saint Sylvester. And she was recently laid to rest, but I wish to take that few minutes to give tribute to such a pivotal life in the life of our nation, Ms. Marjorie Davis. And Madam Speaker, we've also lost a number of serving educators who were in the classroom and during the course of their service have passed on. I want to pay tribute to those lives. And I could talk about the service of teachers today, and I mean at length, but I think as we're dealing with this issue of the Human Rights Committee of this House, I will use that opportunity at another time. We have a town meeting tomorrow at 8 o'clock that is going to be televised live throughout the nation, and that will give an insight into what is happening in education. The member for Marco City, I must say, has really puzzled me in his presentation. And I don't think it was purposeful, deliberate to puzzle me. I think it's just by happenstance. But he indicated, let me just say, right, he said that it's a charade. This whole thing is a charade, but he supports it. You support the charade. Secondly, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable
The
member.
member has misrepresented what I have said. I did not say it was a charade, yet I support it. What I simply said is that this government has an opportunity to demonstrate how serious they are. They would have brought a number of pieces of legislation, and it is our hope that they are going to identify what the gaps are in the wrap-up that she has an opportunity to present, so that we can target those particular gaps.
Thank you, honorable member.
The member is saying that we must give the government now, we're talking about human rights, which we have agreed it's universal. It belongs to no man. It's preserved in our Constitution. Let me just, before I get into the Constitution, the member is saying the government must bring a list. Bring a list, I think he used that word. Bring a list for this important committee who is to investigate human rights promotion and protection in our nation. The government, one part of the Constitution, one body of the Constitution, must bring a list for the committee. I am shocked at such a recommendation. The committee, and you know, let me just read from the member, trust me, if I investigate something, don't bring me no list. Let me investigate. Do not seek to coerce my contemplation of that issue. But the member is here telling the Bahamian people we failed by first he said it's charade, then he said, yes, relax now, St. Anne's, relax. Okay, then he says that we should have guided this, we should guide this committee in its oversight and overview of the issue of human rights in our nation. I don't agree, but let me just look at what the resolution says. The resolution says, be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee, and this is a parliamentary committee, bipartisan, both sides, and including the Senate, members of the Senate, and it has the following terms of reference. These are the terms of reference. They're very vast, and they give huge opportunity to look at anything. You don't need no list from me. And let me just read from it. To assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. To determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations. To report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters. To make recommendations, to guide the legislative process. They want us to give them the law, the legislation we can bring. But this committee has the jurisdiction to make recommendations to guide the legislative process, to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. So this is what the member is calling a charade. Let me just say, and you know, the member, and it's not just this member.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. Each time the member raises this issue, I will stand, Madam.
No, what's the point of order?
I already identified her. It's the same point of order.
What is it?
Again, I made the point, and I'll repeat it each time you use the term, that this administration is the mover of this resolution, Madam Speaker. In moving previous resolutions, or if you bring a bill, there is a mischief. There's something you are trying to solve by bringing the bill. And in each case, this administration has sought to lay out, here are the issues that exist in our society that this resolution or this bill is seeking to solve. So we are within our rights to ask those issues that presently impact our country. What is your position on them? What is your position on those issues? So that list is an important list for this administration to bring.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Saying, you know, but if I on this committee, ain't nobody can give me no list. No one's gonna give me a list. Okay? Now the member wants to be constrained by a list. He wants to be constrained by a list. But this committee should not be constrained. Yes. This committee, let me just read it again, because let me read it again, little pieces of it. To assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. And it goes on and on. That is what the jurisdiction of the committee is. So to say we jive and we shucking or whatever you're suggesting, this committee is a parliamentary committee of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. With this, if we agree to the resolution, and if I think we're hearing now it's not a charade, then therefore we will, yes, time will tell. But don't preempt, don't try to create a bias in the public mind. Not only that, you know, let me just say, the Bahamian people are intelligent. And I know they can say for sure, if you have a committee to assess human rights, that the government is not going to create the barriers or the boundaries of that discussion. It will not do that. I believe every Bahamian will say, allow that committee to do its work.
Member.
Calm down. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Calm down. Yeah. But it's my time now. You're not yours. The other thing I want to point out, what the member has to, the member, you know, let me just say, I think he made some comment about activism when you're in opposition and when you're in government, you got the power. Well, that member was sitting right over here. I never hear him mention any one of those issues. Never once mentioned. In fact, he was peculiarly quiet during those 4 years.
The chair recognizes the honorable
Madam
member.
Speaker, the member is quite interesting because actually the member can submit for the record the articles I sent her to refute this same earlier untruth about when I felt there was a matter that's so fundamental to me, I raise it and send you the article, Guardian, Tribune, etc. So don't try to put that one on me, because you were in previous cabinets where decisions were made where I've said on my feet, chances are you had to hold your nose. And you were there 5 times. And you were in cabinet. We didn't hear your voice. Recently now, you have a voice. Okay, go, carry on.
You had your time.
Carry on.
And you had more than your time. So allow me my time. You know, I ain't speaking in this house for a couple of weeks now. And you do it every single moment and time. Allow me, please. Allow me. Thank you. Thank you very much. But I want to, well, people will know whether or not you were the activist that you are now when you were sitting over there. The other point I want to make, Madam Speaker, is to demonstrate the seriousness of this administration. And it was the laying of a piece of legislation that we have been talking about in this country for a very, very long time. The Ombudsman Bill 2023, which we're going to be debating very shortly after, I guess, the opposition has had a chance to review. But look at the role of the Ombudsman. It's to inquire into and investigate any administration action of an authority for the purpose of deciding whether there is evidence of maladministration or breach of fundamental rights and freedoms on the part of that authority. And then it speaks to pursuant to an investigation, to make recommendations to any authority, etc., to consult, engage, and cooperate with relevant civil society organizations, including ethnic and minority organizations, in conjunction with the minister responsible for human rights. See, this is why this is very conveniently married in this debate. This legislation, to monitor and promote compliance with international and domestic human rights law, including through any of the following: making recommendations to the government as to execution and ratification of an international human rights instrument. So we have this parliamentary committee that we speak of, that someone say is a charade, and then which I do not think it is, because it's bipartisan, and I am trusting that those members will not participate in a charade. And then we have laid the ombudsman legislation, which supplements and buffers, or buttresses the entire commitment to the preservation of human rights in this country. And then it says that and this is clause 7.2. Subject to this act, and the ombudsman may investigate any administrative action taken by or on behalf of any authority where a complaint is made to him by a person who claims to have been treated unjustly as a result of maladministration, or to have had fundamental rights and freedoms breached or violated, and on and on. The legislation is here, and it's to come. And there is a commitment to this issue, whether it's accepted or not. In fact, I think this is probably the most substantive advance we have seen in a very long time to this issue of human rights. On the issue of human rights, and I just want to say that the members spoke about the history and how it's so nice to talk about history, but you know what, but right now, history is very important, you know, very important. Yeah, you made that point, but I'm telling you why it's important to talk about history. And you know, Marcus Garvey speaks about this. I quote it often, but he said, "A people without knowledge of their origin, history, and culture is like a tree without roots. Any little wind blow, you're gone. You have to understand your history." And that is why the member for Charlotte went through the history of our people. And you know, when you look at the phenomenon of slavery in this throughout not this nation, throughout the region, it tells you why there is this commitment to bring our people to a place. It's not a finite thing. It is an evolving journey, and you know, and from time to time, new issues will arise, as we've heard some of them in here today. Those issues. But on the issue of I want to quote this thing about history and why is history important. And it comes from, and this is an artist that I truly admire, and his name is Bob Marley. And I speak about this because this is what I believe is the true purpose of governance. He says that in his song, Redemption Song, he says here, "Old pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong." Listen to what he says. "My hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? Because all I ever have, redemption songs. And I quote that because this is what governance is about. Our history is very important to understand what our obligation is to our people as we move forward futuristically. By the hand of this, we forward in this generation triumphantly. That is why history is so important. That is why in 1967, and we've heard all this before, it was thought important to stop children dropping out at the age of 12 and 13 and allow them to finish high school and to go to university, to qualify. This is all part of our history. You can't disconnect it. It is continuous expression of how we as a people believe where we should be. And so the history is very important as to where we are. I wanted to talk the United Nations, and this is not just ticking a box, and I think that's a little offensive because, it's like saying, we ain't serious, man, and I don't like that. I got offended when you tell me I ain't serious. This is not just ticking a box, but I want to read from the speech of Lyndon Pendling, which he gave at the United Nations on the occasion of the acceptance of the Bahamas to membership of the United Nations in September of 1973. And this is what Father of the Nation said when he addressed that august body. For those who say we ain't serious, we believe, and he's talking about the Bahamian people, we believe that we can make a contribution to a better international understanding by sharing our experience in human relations, in effecting change without disorder, revolution without bloodshed, and in developing a stable economic and social order. We of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas are aware that it is indeed unrealistic to think that nation states can exist in isolation. No man, no nation is an island unto itself. There is need for perpetual interdependence of the big and the small, which will guarantee the perpetuation of the United Nations as the center for the harmonization of the actions of nations, concerned with international peace and security, equality and freedom, economic and social justice for all peoples. While man is reaching dramatically into the infinite limits of outer space and the fascinating confines of ocean depths, he is also prosaically reaching out into his own mind to reassess his global value system, which has yet to acknowledge that a world dominated by power politics and calculated alignments of self-interest and fear is less important than a world morality as expressed in the Charter of the United Nations. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas subscribes to the concept of alignments of states having in common respect for human and spiritual values rooted in the belief in the absolutely indivisible freedom of the mind of man. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas enters the United Nations in the closing decades of the 20th century. We came late, but having arrived, we pledge to abide by the obligations imposed upon us as a member of the United Nations organization. Listen, let me just repeat that part. We pledge to abide by the obligations imposed upon us as a member of the United Nations organization, and we shall not shrink from our responsibilities as an active member of this institution. We have no delusions of grandeur about the influence of an independent Bahamas may have on world events, but we believe that this organization and its collective influence can hold, promote, and guarantee peace and protect mankind from the capacity for its destruction which some enjoy. On our part, we have no capacity to wage war, yet we realize that peace is not an end in itself, but that peace provides man with the opportunity to share the wealth of the earth in such fashion that all its people will enjoy the objectives of the Charter of the United Nations.
Yes, yes.
That was our pledge. That was our pledge at the United Nations. See, we have to be careful when you get into the politics that you don't go to the fundamentals of who we are collectively. That is the danger. We have to be very careful. Yes, there is a place for political dialogue, but some things are fundamental to the collective vision of who we are. We know there are imperfections in our society, and we have to address them. But we have to be very careful in our, what's the word I want? Our drive. That's the best word I could find, to make political points, that we go to the core, we cut to the core of the things that hold us together. And so, Madam Speaker, the whole issue of human rights, history is important because it's been an evolutionary journey throughout mankind. And, you know, in fact, I was reading something from the United Nations where it's described more than a evolution. It's been a fight. It's been a fight. And this is taken from the statement of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, but he says it so well, and this was done in 29th of March, 2022, and he says that he talks about there is so much that we do not know, and today must be a day of learning. Behind the facts and figures are millions of human stories, stories of untold suffering and pain, stories of families and communities ripped apart, but also stories of awe-inspiring courage and defiance against the cruelty of oppressors. He's speaking about slavery specifically. We need to tell this was last year he was talking about slavery, it's history. We also, but he says that we need to tell these stories. That's what he says. And I agree with him. We need to tell these stories of righteous resistance from Zumbi dos Palmeiras in Brazil to Queen Nani of the Maroons in Jamaica, to Queen Ana Nzinga of the Kingdom of Ndongo in present-day Angola, to Toussaint Louverture of Saint-Domingue in the present-day Haiti, and to many more. We also need to hear stories of prohibitions of the slave trade in the imamate of Fouta Toro in present-day Senegal during the reign of Abdul Qadir, well before abolition movements gained momentum. We will never know every act of resistance, great or small. See, the history is important because it places value. It places value because it's the blood that was shed for it. So history is important. But he says here, and this is the last quote from this, we will never know every act of resistance, great or small, that slowly but surely triumphed over injustice, repression, and enslavement. But these accounts are crucial to our understanding of a past whose pernicious cause and most persistent legacy stains to our present day. And he speaks about racism. So it has been a fight. And so the history is important. Black Tuesday is important. And we'll celebrate that tomorrow. And the entire journey of women getting the right to vote. And yes, we still have issues. Yes, we went to a referendum, was not successful. The then government, which is now the opposition, did not support it. I led the debate in that. And I went out there and, you know, after the different allegations of what it really meant and all of that, it failed. But, you know, to come in here now and say, you know, why we ain't got it, well, you know, you tell me. So human rights is a work in progress. It's not finite. It's not, you either have it or you don't have it. It's a work in progress. It requires monitoring. It requires accountability. It requires a sensitivity and a commitment to ensuring that these rights are protected. And the member for St. Barnabas spoke about the tensions, and I think that the member for Charlotte answered it. But there shouldn't be any tensions because there's only one supreme law. If you look at Article 2, it says the Constitution is the supreme law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And subject to the provisions of this Constitution, if any other law is inconsistent with the Constitution, this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. So where there's a tension, this article speaks to that. Additionally, on the issue of the rights, where did I put that section? It speaks to the fact that these rights are not blanket, that they are subject to public policy, public policy, and the rights of the individual. I'm trying to find the specific. It's 15, right? Yes, yes, yes. Yes. And it says, and it speaks to those provisions, so the subsequent provisions of this chapter shall have effect for the purpose of affording protection to the aforesaid rights and freedoms, subject to such limitations of that protection as are contained in those provisions, being limitations designed to ensure that the enjoyment of the said rights and freedoms by any individual does not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others or the public interest. So it's not boundless. It's within a context. So as it relates to this particular resolution, Madam Speaker, we believe it is not a charade. It is probably one of the most important steps that has been taken in a long time in this Parliament. And in particular, which is an issue that I feel very, very strongly about, is the rights of children and the issues that affect children. And I had a chance to look at the Convention for the Child, and I won't go through it now. I have it here for those who want to see it. But I was telling the member for West Grand Bahama, when I was practicing law, and I used to go to the juvenile court, there was one particular little boy. It's just a little boy. Every time I went to juvenile court over the years, he was sitting in there for something. This would have been about 20 years ago. And every time he came in there, it was for a more serious offense. So it started with a very minor thing. Then when I gone back in there, he said, "Hey, Miss Hannah," he's sitting there again, something more serious. And he was escalating. And just after he turned 18, he killed someone. And he was executed. I raise that to say that our juvenile justice system must be, and you will see that there's some, the member for Freetown is circulating now. It's something I feel very, very good about, which I don't know if he spoke about it previously, yeah. Okay. He will speak to it. He will speak to it. Mm-hmm. I can? Yeah. This is an event, official opening ceremony for the Juvenile Detention Center on Thursday, 11th of May, 2023. This is the first time in the history of our nation that we have. I'm winding up in. No, you are going to speak? Oh, I think This is the first time in the history of our nation that we will see a center that is created especially for the detention of children or young people of serious offenses. Right now, they're part of some wider thing in Her Majesty's prison. But not Bahamas, what is it called? The Bahamas Department of Corrections. But this is about human rights. And this demonstrates the seriousness of this government to the human rights of children, and in particular child offenders. And let me just say, Madam Speaker, we see in the schools a lot of children engaged or children, not a lot, engaged in negative behaviors. And when we look at that child, we find that there are some very serious, oftentimes serious underlying issues that this child is subject to, external to that child, from the outside of the child itself. And so how we protect children is one of the most important aspects of human rights promotion in this country. And I know that the member for West Grand Bahama will bring soon legislation and or make announcements that will address the issues of children. But on the point that the member for Markle City made about activists, I consider myself an activist as the Minister of Education. I have not come to hold up a status quo. Our children have for many, many years been the victims of a system that has not adequately responded to what the outcomes have been to our children. And there are many things I can speak to, but two of the things I want to speak to is ensuring that we expand access for children at pre-primary level. We do not have universal pre-primary in this country. It's a major deficit. And we have to we are making that commitment to cause for 100% access to pre-primary. The second thing is having children access who need special education, or they call exceptional children, that we provide the facilities and the instruction for children of special needs. And that is work that is now underway. That is work that is now underway to ensure these children who are in this category are able to access. And we're also looking at, for those disruptive children, we're looking at their suspension centers to see how we can meet the needs of children. I looked at the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, and all of these relate to human rights issues. No poverty, that's an issue, that's a human right issue. Human right issue. And it's not just about pointing the finger and say, you ain't do this and you ain't do that. It's how do we move forward in this economy with ensuring that there is greater equity for the Bahamian people in this economy.
Yes.
Greater equity, and that requires looking at how we strike foreign direct investment arrangements. It's how we looked, how recently with the minimum wage being raised, it's about how we empower people in the marketplace to live decent lives. So poverty is a big part of that. That's a commitment in this new day. We have to commit to that. The other second one is zero hunger. This is an issue that we all have to address in this country. These are structural. This is not pointing a finger, you ain't do it. These are structural issues about how we do business in this country. And it's not just the Bahamas, but we're only concerned with the Bahamas right now. How do we ensure that we create a social reality that provides our people to have greater equity of access to all the things of life that lead to a decent life? That is a human rights issue. The third one is good health and well-being. The Minister of Health is here, and he's starting initiatives on promoting healthy lifestyles for young people and adults. Wellness, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Those are the sustainable goals that the former administration committed themselves to, and so do we. So I end really by saying that our history is critical to understanding and to infusing our commitment to protecting and promoting the human rights of all people. And as time goes on, your understanding of human rights may grow and it may be enhanced. But it's very important that we have a heightened understanding of it. This committee is not a charade. It better not be, should not be. It will comprise government and opposition members and the Senate, and it will allow for a scrutiny and an observation of what is happening in this country. All of the issues we spoke about in here today can be the subject matter of this committee. It does not have to be listed by anyone in here. We ask the members of the opposition to use their minds and their hearts to represent the people that they represent on this committee without me giving them a list. And again, the ombudsman legislation is also another tier for protection of human rights.
Yes.
We look forward to the day that and let me just say, I think it's very important that we are having this discussion, because perhaps there has been some loosening of our understanding of how these issues may have affected others in our community. And I can tell you, during the lockdowns, this potentially was a big part of the question of human rights. But I think that the fact that we're having this conversation now, this should not be a differentiation of our positions. We should be on the same page on this, because all we're simply saying is, let us form a committee to look at and to ensure that the human rights of our citizens or any persons are protected under our watch. Shouldn't be, I don't see where it's controversial or requires a finger pointing or even any anger. And so we believe it's important. It's a major step in our parliamentary history, and we are trusting and hoping that it will lead to a heightened sensitivity and understanding to how important it is to protect the rights of our people, of all people in this nation, because this is what will inure to us having a grander future, because we have come from a place, from the bottomless pit, but our hands have been made strong by the hand of the Almighty, and we forward in this generation triumphantly. So again, Madam Speaker, I thank you, and I move that this resolution be accepted by this House, accepted by this House, and that we begin the important work of that committee. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Madam Speaker, there is an amendment that we'd like to make, Madam Speaker. The amendment is found, now therefore be it resolved that the House approves the constitution of a committee of 5 members of the House of Assembly to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. It should be 5 members of the House of Assembly. At the present time, it states 5 members of Parliament, 5 members of the House of Assembly. The Senate will, at their next sitting, move for 3 members of the Senate, and that will constitute the 8 members of the committee.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the motion be agreed, that the amendment be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The amendment has been agreed.
We now move that the resolution, the question be put.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee are as follows: to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights-related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. As many are in favor shall remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. This resolution is agreed. Further resolutions?
No further resolutions, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. We will now revert back to the order of business. Member statements? No member statements.
No.
Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings.
Madam Speaker, wish to renew all notices in the name of the government.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Sit down.
Madam Speaker, we renew all notices in the name of the opposition.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Adjournment.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the House stands adjourned to Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Second?
Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House stands adjourned to May 10th, Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 at 10 a.m. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Final adjournment.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the House stands adjourned to Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House stands adjourned to Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 at 10 a.m. Shad, please get this thing.